Hello, everybody. You're listening to Sleepwalker Radio. If our stories help you sleep or relax, please like, comment, and subscribe. Now close your eyes and let's begin. I was about 16 when that envelope came. I remember it was a Tuesday because I had just come back from school and was sitting in the living room eating a bowl of cereal. My mom always picked up the mail on her way back from work because our mailbox was down the street. She walked in, carrying a small pile of envelopes in one hand and her purse slung over her other shoulder. She looked tired like always, her hair still tied back from work and her blouse wrinkled. She dropped the keys into the ceramic bowl by the door and placed the mail on the dining table. I didn't think much of it. I was too busy scrolling on my phone and lazily spooning cereal into my mouth. But after a few minutes, I noticed she was still standing there, holding one envelope in her hand and just staring at it. I put my phone down and looked at her. She looked confused, like her mind wasn't fully there. I asked her what was wrong, but she didn't answer right away. She sat down at the table and held the envelope up, staring at the handwriting on the front. I remember thinking it looked normal, just her name written neatly in blue ink. There was no return address in the top left corner. Instead, in block letters, it just said Florida. That was all. No city, no street, just the entire state in capital letters. It felt odd. We didn't know anyone in Florida. None of our family lived there. The handwriting was neat but shaky in some letters, like the person writing it was older or had a shaky hand. She carefully opened it, sliding her finger under the seal. I was watching her face more than the envelope, and when she pulled out the photo and the note, I saw her face go pale. She just sat there, holding the picture in one hand and a small piece of paper in the other. She didn't move for a long time, just stared. I got up and walked over, looking down at what she was holding. It was an old photograph, probably from the 60s or early 70s. It was small, almost square, with white borders. It showed a baby lying on a yellow blanket on the grass. The colors were faded, with that old photo tint that makes everything look orange or brownish. The baby had thick dark hair and chubby arms. I didn't recognize the baby at all. I thought maybe it was someone from her side of the family, like her little sister or cousin, but then I realized it was her. I'd seen pictures of her as a baby in old albums. It was definitely her. She was maybe 6 months old in that photo, lying on her stomach and smiling at the camera. I looked at the piece of paper. It was just a torn-out piece from a lined notepad, yellowish at the edges. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope. It only said one sentence. "I think you sent this by mistake." That was it. Nothing else. No name, no explanation, no contact information. I felt a chill go down my back as I read it. I looked at my mom. Her hand was shaking as she held the photo. She kept saying softly under her breath, "But this was in the basement. This was in the basement." She stood up suddenly, leaving the cereal bowl on the table, and walked downstairs into the basement. I followed her, feeling the cold concrete floor under my socks as we descended. The basement was unfinished, with exposed beams and old dusty boxes stacked against the walls. The small window near the ceiling let in some daylight, but it always felt dim down there. She walked straight to the far corner, where we kept old boxes of photos and documents. There was one large plastic tub with a cracked lid. She bent down, unlatched it, and pulled it open. Inside were dozens of photo albums, old envelopes with negatives, and stacks of loose photos tied with rubber bands. She started rummaging through them, her breathing fast and shallow. I watched her flip through photos, looking for something, mumbling to herself. Finally, she stopped and sat back on her heels. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. She said that the photo that arrived in the mail was from this box. She remembered putting it here when she moved into this house after marrying my dad. That was over 20 years ago. She never took it out since. There was no reason for it to leave this box, let alone travel over 1,000 miles to Florida and come back with a note like that. She spent the next few days obsessed with it. She called her older sister, asked if she ever visited Florida or sent any family photos to anyone, but her sister was just as confused. She asked her parents, my grandparents, but they didn't know anything either. She checked with old family friends. Nobody knew anything about it. She even asked my dad to go check the basement window locks, thinking maybe someone broke in and took the photo, but there were no signs of any break-in. The window latches were still rusty and untouched. No footprints in the dust by the windows. Nothing. After about a week, she put the photo and note back in the envelope and placed it in her dresser drawer. For a while, she would open it every morning and stare at it before getting ready for work, as if trying to force herself to remember something. She started getting nervous around the house. At night, she would lock every window twice. She never used to do that. She kept telling me to make sure the doors were locked before bed. She started leaving lights on in the living room at night too. The envelope became like a curse sitting in that drawer. I never touched it again after that first day. One day a month later, she finally sat me down and told me her theory. It wasn't supernatural or anything like that. She believed someone had been in our basement at some point. Maybe a contractor, plumber, or electrician. Someone working in the house who saw the box of photos and quietly took one. She said it was probably just some creepy person trying to mess with her head by mailing it back from Florida. Maybe they moved there after working here. Or maybe they were visiting Florida and sent it from there just to make it confusing. I asked her why anyone would do that, and she just shook her head and said, "Because people are strange." After that, we never really talked about it again. She left the envelope in her drawer for years. Sometimes I'd see her looking at it on quiet Sunday mornings when she thought nobody was watching. She'd just hold it in her hand, staring at the faded picture of herself as a baby, with that note folded behind it. Years passed, and I moved out for college. Every time I came back to visit, I'd see little changes in her behavior that reminded me of that envelope. She always checked the locks twice. She always closed the blinds before sunset. She started keeping a bat under her bed. She said it was just in case of intruders, but I knew it was because she never felt fully safe again after that day. One winter, when I was home for the holidays, we had family over for dinner. Everyone was laughing and talking, the house filled with warm smells of food and cinnamon candles. After dinner, my uncle was telling us a story about an old coworker who got caught stealing personal items from clients' houses while doing HVAC repairs. He'd go into their basements or attics under the excuse of checking vents, then pocket small items or personal memorabilia as some sick habit. As my uncle spoke, I saw my mom go silent. She stared down at her empty plate, not even blinking. That night, after everyone left and I was helping her clean up, she looked at me and said, "I think that's what happened." Her voice was small and tired. I asked her what she meant, and she said, "That photo. Someone like that man your uncle talked about. He must have taken it while working here. He kept it with him, and when he ended up in Florida, he mailed it back to me. Just to mess with me. Just to let me know he could get into my life like that." I stood there in the kitchen, the tap running as I rinsed dishes, and I felt a wave of anger mixed with disgust. The idea that someone had been in our basement, going through our family's personal boxes, and then decided to send her that photo years later just to scare her, it made my skin crawl. I hated that someone did that to her. I hated that whoever it was probably sat back and enjoyed knowing she'd be terrified by it. After that conversation, she finally threw the envelope away. She didn't keep it as a memory anymore. She put it in a garbage bag, tied it up tight, and told me to take it out to the big trash bin by the road. I did as she asked. I carried the bag down the driveway at night, the cold winter air stinging my cheeks, and threw it into the bin. I remember looking down at it sitting among other bags, wondering what kind of person would do something like that. She never brought it up again. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be. But sometimes, even now, when I'm in a quiet basement alone, or when I see an old family photo, I think about that envelope. I think about how small the world can feel when you realize there are people who do things like that for no reason except to feel some twisted power over a stranger. It makes me lock my doors twice too. It makes me keep a bat by my bed. Because the scariest part of that entire story wasn't the envelope, or the photo, or the note. It was knowing that whoever did it was real. Knowing they were just a normal person walking around, living their life, carrying other people's memories with them, and choosing to send them back just to let you know they were there. Just to remind you that they could reach into your life whenever they wanted. And there's nothing supernatural about that. It's just real life. And sometimes, that's the scariest thing of all. I remember that old house in Toronto so clearly. It was a typical split-level rental with a driveway that sloped down towards the garage. The front door opened into a small hallway that led to a living room with big windows that faced the street. 3 of us lived there, all university students just trying to save money. so we rented the main floor together. We never really cared who lived in the basement. All we knew was that someone else paid their rent to the landlord and used the side entrance to go straight downstairs. It was just easier to live like that, minding our own business. I never met the guy in the basement in person. He smoked a lot of weed, we knew that for sure. The smell often drifted up through the vents, making our kitchen smell skunky late at night when we were making instant noodles or peanut butter sandwiches before bed. I didn't mind the smell too much, but what bothered me was the coughing. Every single night, without fail, he coughed as if he was about to hack up a lung. It wasn't normal coughing either. It sounded deep, ragged, harsh. Almost like something was stuck in his chest, and he was trying to force it out. At first, I thought he was just taking massive hits off a bong or something, and that explained the violent coughing fits. But after a while, it became clear it wasn't just the weed. There was something sick about the way he coughed. Something desperate and hollow. My room was at the far end of the house. It faced the driveway and was right next to the garage. Most nights when I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone with one earbud in, I would hear his coughing down below. But slowly, I started to realize it didn't seem like it was coming from directly beneath my room. It seemed like it came from slightly to the side, under the garage area. I ignored it for weeks because it didn't matter to me where he was coughing from. All I wanted was for him to stop. But it kept happening, like clockwork. Always around midnight, always hacking and retching until it sounded like he was gagging. One evening, I was hanging out in the living room with my roommate Jamie. We were watching something on Netflix when the coughing started up again. I paused the show and asked him if he ever noticed where the coughing was coming from. He said it sounded like it came from under my room, but when we both stood there listening carefully, it definitely seemed shifted, like it echoed under the garage. We got curious. The garage was unfinished and mostly empty aside from a few tools, cardboard boxes from old IKEA furniture, and bags of recycling that we hadn't taken out yet. We walked in there and stomped our feet on the concrete floor. Sure enough, it sounded hollow in one section, like there was an empty space right beneath where we were standing. It was a weird feeling, realizing that there was a hidden room underneath. We joked about it being a grow-op or a weed dungeon. We laughed and forgot about it after a while. It was just another strange thing about renting old houses in Toronto. They always had weird half-built extensions, sealed-off crawl spaces, or unfinished storage areas. We didn't think much of it. A couple months later, the basement guy moved out. We only found out because the landlord messaged us saying someone new would be moving into the basement suite, and they would be coming by to clean. But then Jamie's friend, Max, ended up needing a place to live urgently after his lease ended downtown, so he moved into the basement instead. We helped him carry down his boxes and his old TV. It was the first time I'd actually gone down there. The basement stairs were narrow and steep. The air down there smelled damp and stale, mixed with leftover weed. The walls were that half-finished drywall you see in basements where landlords don't bother painting because tenants don't care. I remember walking through the main basement area, noticing how it felt colder down there, like a permanent draft flowed along the floor. Max was annoyed from the second he walked in. The place was a mess. Empty weed containers, crumpled chip bags, old pizza boxes, beer cans. It looked like the previous guy had lived down there like a shut-in. There were clothes piled in the corners, half-folded and dusty. Max looked disgusted, but determined to clean it all up before moving his stuff in. While Max was sorting things out, Jamie and I started looking around, curious about the layout. We found the small laundry room tucked in the corner under my bedroom. It was just a cement floor with a washer and dryer shoved against the wall and exposed pipes running overhead. But there was something weird about that room. Against the far cement wall, almost hidden behind a leaning broom and mop bucket, was a small red door. It wasn't a normal-sized door either. It was about chest height, only wide enough for a single person to squeeze through, and painted a faded, peeling red. There was no handle, just a small metal latch. It looked old, like it had been there before the drywall and renovations. I reached out and pulled the latch open. The door creaked in a way that made my chest tighten with unease. Behind it was a small cement room. The floor, ceiling, and walls were all bare concrete. The space was filled with random junk, old ripped couches, moldy cushions, broken chairs stacked on top of each other, plastic crates full of trash, empty water bottles, cigarette butts, rolled up carpets. It smelled like damp mildew mixed with stale smoke. There were dark patches of black mold climbing up the far corner. It was horrible. Jamie stepped inside and immediately gagged from the smell. The ceiling was low enough that he had to hunch his shoulders. The whole space felt like it was underground, like a bunker. That's when it hit me. This was the hollow space under the garage. This was where we had heard the coughing coming from all those nights. The room was disgusting. It felt unhealthy to breathe the air in there, and I stepped back out quickly, feeling a tight ache in my temples from the smell alone. Jamie laughed awkwardly, making some joke about it being a dungeon. But I felt off, really off. I kept thinking about how we had heard him coughing every night, and how it sounded like he was down in this disgusting concrete room, surrounded by mold and rotting furniture, just hacking his lungs out alone in the dark. Who would spend their nights sitting in a place like that? Max didn't care about our discoveries. He was too busy cursing the state of his new apartment, complaining about needing to spend a whole day cleaning it before he could even unpack his mattress. I remember joking that at least he didn't need to worry about the coughing anymore. But Max didn't laugh. He looked at me confused and asked what coughing I was talking about. I explained how the guy used to cough every single night, always at the same time, so loud it woke me up sometimes. Max just shook his head and said the place had been empty for weeks. At least 2 weeks. He said the landlord told him the last guy moved out over 14 days ago, and nobody had been in there since. I remember standing there, looking at the open red door leading into that foul little room under the garage, thinking about those last 2 weeks. I knew what I had heard. Every single night, without fail, the coughing happened. The same deep, painful coughing that rattled through the air vents and woke me up. But if the guy moved out 2 weeks earlier, who was coughing in that dungeon? That question stuck with me. I felt cold all over, like a slow chill creeping up my spine. I didn't say anything more to Max about it because he already looked annoyed enough, and Jamie just shrugged it off, saying maybe the landlord had someone else working down there, or maybe the dates were wrong. But I knew what I heard. Every night, around midnight, I heard the coughing, always coming from that spot. Always the same violent, choking sound, echoing up from under the garage through the silent house. That night, I lay in bed staring at my ceiling, thinking about that room. Thinking about how it felt to stand in that concrete dungeon, with the peeling red door and the stale, rotting air. I pictured the coughing man sitting down there alone on the broken couch in the dark, hunched over, gasping and choking, his chest heaving while mold grew along the walls around him. I wondered why he spent his nights in there when he had a basement suite to sleep in. I wondered if he really was coughing because of the weed, or if he was sick with something worse. I wondered why, if he was gone, I still heard the coughing night after night. Eventually, Max moved out 6 months later when he got a job in another city. We all went our separate ways after graduation. The landlord renovated the house after we left, tearing out the basement drywall and redoing the garage. Sometimes I still think about that place when I'm lying awake at night, trying to fall asleep in my new apartment. I think about that little red door and the concrete room under the garage. I think about how I could still hear the coughing for 2 weeks after the guy moved out. The same deep, rattling, painful cough every single night. It's been years, but sometimes, when everything is quiet and I'm lying alone in the dark, I can almost hear it again, faintly in the back of my mind, like an echo from underground. And I wonder if it was ever really him coughing in the first place, or if it was just the way the house sounded at night, settling and shifting. But deep down, I don't really believe that, because I know what I heard. And no matter how far away I move from that place, I'll never forget the sound of someone down there in the dark, coughing until it felt like their lungs were going to tear apart, long after they were supposed to be gone. When I was 7, my parents told me I would be living with my grandmother for a while. They said they had to go work in another city, and it would only be for a few months until my big brother finished middle school and they found a better place for all of us. At that age, it didn't really sink in that they were leaving me. I was just excited. My grandma always spoiled me with sweets and let me stay up late watching whatever I wanted on TV. She lived in a small 2-bedroom house that always smelled like old wood and oil from her cooking. The front door opened into the living room where the TV sat on a short metal table. There were lace curtains on the window and plastic flowers in a dusty vase on the little table beside her recliner. Behind that living room was the kitchen with an old gas stove that made a clicking sound before the flame caught. Then there were 2 bedrooms down a narrow hallway lined with old family photos. The hallway felt dark all the time, even in the day. My grandma lived with 4 of my aunts and my uncle. 3 of my aunts slept with me in one room on 2 mattresses that were pushed together on the floor, and my uncle slept on a mattress in the living room with my grandma in her recliner. My other aunt had a whole bedroom to herself. I thought it was unfair because she didn't even work. She stayed in her room all day drawing on the walls with crayons and talking to herself. They told me she was sick in the head, and sometimes when I walked past her room I would hear her whispering, then suddenly shouting, then whispering again. The walls were covered with scribbles in different colors, lines that made no sense, shapes that looked like houses or faces, or just random circles. Some days she would draw the same shape over and over again until her crayon was too small to hold properly. At first, I was scared of her. She never ate with us. My grandma would leave her food outside her door on a plastic tray, and later the tray would be empty. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I would hear her door creak open. Her feet would slap against the cement floor softly as she walked to the kitchen to get water. I would lie there on the mattress, holding my blanket tight under my chin, staring at the open bedroom door, hoping she wouldn't come in. But she never did. She always went back to her room. After a while, I got used to her. I was having fun at Grandma's house. She gave me cream biscuits and sweet tea every afternoon and let me stir the pot when she cooked rice. In the evenings, my uncle would watch wrestling on TV, and I would sit cross-legged in front of him, watching the fights with wide eyes, copying the wrestlers' moves until Grandma yelled at me to sit still, or I would knock over the teacups. At night, my aunts and I would lie down on the mattresses, covering ourselves with mismatched blankets. The smell of hair oil, Vicks VapoRub, and washing powder filled the room. One of my aunts snored loudly, but I was always so tired that I fell asleep quickly. Sometimes I woke up to the sound of my aunt with schizophrenia talking to herself, but I never really listened to what she was saying. It was just background noise by then. One night, I woke up feeling like something was off. I didn't hear the usual snoring. I didn't hear the creaking sounds of the old house settling. I opened my eyes slowly and saw the outline of someone crouched beside me. I thought it was one of my other aunts checking if I had kicked off my blanket again. But then I saw the glint of metal reflecting the dim light from the hallway. She was holding a pair of scissors. She was holding them so close to my neck that if I swallowed too hard, I felt like the blade would touch my skin. I froze completely. My eyes were wide open, but I couldn't even blink. I could see her messy hair falling over her face, her lips moving, but no words coming out. She was staring at my hair, her head tilted to one side, her hands shaking just a bit as she held the scissors in the air. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should scream. I didn't want to scare her. I didn't want to move either because if she got startled, she might cut me by mistake. My chest felt tight, and my stomach felt like it was turning inside out. I could hear my heartbeat pounding so loud in my ears it felt like my whole body was vibrating with it. She just stayed there, breathing heavily, staring at my hair. Then slowly, she closed the scissors, and the sound of the blades brushing against each other made my skin crawl. She got up, turned around, and walked out of the room. I stayed awake until the sun rose, too afraid to close my eyes again. When my grandma found out what happened, she scolded my aunt and made her stay in her room all day. My uncle sat quietly in the corner with his head down, not saying anything. My other aunts kept shaking their heads and whispering to each other, looking at me like I was made of glass. My parents came to get me the next day. They didn't even sit down for tea. They just grabbed my small suitcase, hugged my grandma, and walked me out to the car. I remember looking back at the house, at the thin curtains fluttering in the wind, at the small front yard where my grandma grew tulsi and marigolds in old plastic buckets. I felt sad leaving her, but I was happy to get away from my aunt. My parents had found a new place to live in the other city. It was an old house, very old. The walls were cracked in some places, and the paint was peeling off near the ceiling. The first night there, I went to use the bathroom before bed. I remember lifting the toilet lid and seeing something move. I stepped back quickly, and that's when I saw them. Earthworms. Long pink-brown worms crawling out of the toilet bowl, squirming against each other. There were more coming out of the shower drain too, wriggling across the floor towards the small wet patch near the sink. I screamed for my mom and she came running, her face tired and frustrated. She pulled me out of the bathroom and shut the door. She told my dad to go deal with it. He flushed them down and poured buckets of water until they were gone. I refused to use that bathroom after dark. For weeks, every time I went in there, I checked the toilet and shower drain for worms. Sometimes they were there, sometimes they weren't. But I never felt comfortable in that house. At Grandma's, even though my aunt was crazy, I felt loved. I felt like people cared about me. In that old house, with earthworms crawling out of the toilet at night, it felt like I was living in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. My parents were always busy with work, coming home tired and quiet, and my brother was in his own world with his studies and friends. I spent a lot of time alone in that house, sitting on the cold floor, staring at the thin cracks on the wall that ran like spiderwebs towards the ceiling. Years later, I realized my aunt probably just wanted to cut a strand of my hair. She had a habit of doing that for a while, snipping pieces of people's hair while they slept or sat watching TV. But back then, as a child, waking up with her crouched beside me holding scissors to my neck, it felt like I was seconds away from dying. Now when I think about it, I can still feel that cold sweat on my back, the smell of damp blankets, and the silent darkness of that room with four people breathing in their sleep while I lay awake, staring at my crazy aunt with the scissors. I never told anyone how scared I was. My parents thought I was just overreacting. They were too busy settling into their new jobs and life in the city. I learned to keep it to myself, just like I learned to check the toilet every time before using it, to flush twice before sitting down, to close my eyes in the shower so I wouldn't see the worms crawling out of the drain. It's been years now. I don't visit my grandma's house anymore. My aunt still lives there, still talks to herself, still draws on the walls. I wonder sometimes what she would have done if I had moved in with them permanently. Would she have kept cutting hair until there was nothing left to cut? Or would she have moved on to something else? Thinking about it makes my chest feel heavy. There's a part of me that still sees her shadow in the corner of my room sometimes, still hears the soft metallic sound of scissors blades closing in the dark. And no matter how old I get, that memory never really goes away. It just hides in the back of my mind like earthworms hiding in the drain, waiting for the night to come out again. I was at the train station that night because I had just finished some overtime at work. I remember feeling so tired that I almost fell asleep sitting there, slouched forward with my arms resting on my backpack. The cold breeze of midnight kept me awake though. It was late and the platform was mostly empty, except for a few people sitting far apart on metal benches, looking down at their phones or just staring into nothing. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, flickering every now and then, and the quietness of the station felt heavy. My train was scheduled for 12:15 a.m. I checked my phone for the time over and over out of boredom. I was just sitting there, trying to keep my eyes open, when I noticed a figure coming from the far end of the platform. I didn't think much of it at first because people come and go all night, but as he got closer I realized he was taller than anyone I had seen in a long time. He looked almost 7 feet tall. His steps were uneven, and he carried a large old-fashioned suitcase in one hand, dragging it awkwardly along the concrete. There was something off about him immediately. He was wearing a long brown coat that looked too big even for his frame, hanging low near his ankles, and his shoes were covered in thick mud. As he got even closer, I noticed his jeans were ripped at the knees, and there were fresh-looking cuts on his forearms. His skin was pale and his hair was messy, hanging down in thin clumps across his forehead. But what caught my attention the most was that suitcase. I could see under the dim station lights that the suitcase was leaking some dark liquid near the corners. It wasn't water because it looked thicker. The handle of the suitcase had smears of whatever that liquid was, and his fingers were stained with it too. He kept stopping to adjust his grip, switching hands every few steps like it was incredibly heavy. I felt a weird tightness in my chest as I watched him. I tried to tell myself to look away, that it wasn't my business, but something about the way he moved felt threatening. His eyes were wide open and unfocused, like he wasn't really seeing where he was going. Then he looked right at me. I froze for a second. His eyes were bloodshot, and his cheeks were streaked with dirt. He started walking towards me faster, his boots slapping the concrete with heavy, dragging steps. When he was just a few feet away, I realized he smelled horrible. There was a sour stench coming off him, mixed with something like rotting meat. I felt my stomach twist. Without any hesitation, he pushed the suitcase towards me, almost shoving it into my legs, and ordered me to take it. His voice was slurred and aggressive. I could smell alcohol on his breath, but also something else, like metallic blood. For a second, I just stood there staring at him, unable to move or think. The liquid from the suitcase was dripping onto the floor, forming a small dark puddle by my shoes. I didn't want to look at it too closely. I glanced up at his face again. He had scratches and bruises all over, and there was dirt up to his cheeks, as if he had been crawling through mud. His lips were cracked and dry. He said it again, louder, ordering me to take the bag. The veins on his neck were bulging out as he clenched his jaw. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry. I finally managed to say, sorry, but it came out so quiet that I wasn't even sure he heard me. I started backing away slowly, feeling my legs shake. He took a step forward with the suitcase, almost like he was going to shove it into my chest. That's when I heard the faint sound of my train's horn in the distance. Relief washed over me for a split second, but the fear came back stronger when he stepped even closer, muttering something under his breath that I couldn't understand. His words were garbled, like he was speaking a language I didn't know or he was too drunk to form words. The puddle under the suitcase was getting bigger, dripping slowly onto the platform. I tried not to stare at it. When the lights of the train came into view at the end of the track, I turned and walked quickly towards where the doors would stop. My heart was thumping so hard it felt like it was in my throat. I could hear him following me, dragging that suitcase behind him. He kept muttering, his voice getting louder and more angry. I didn't want to look back, but I could hear the suitcase scraping against the ground. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my train card from my pocket, almost dropping it. The train slowed down, headlights glowing bright, metal screeching softly as it came to a halt. I stepped right up to the edge of the platform, waiting for the doors to open. He was only a few steps behind me now, still talking in that strange, angry tone. The smell of him was stronger now, mixed with the bitter scent of old blood. When the doors slid open, I jumped inside, almost tripping over the step. I turned around just as he reached the doorway. His eyes locked on mine. There was so much anger in them that I felt my chest tighten with fear. He raised a long finger and pointed right at me, his mouth moving quickly, yelling things that didn't sound like real words. His spit sprayed the glass as he shouted. Then the doors shut between us, muffling his voice but not blocking out his rage. The train jolted softly and began to move. He kept walking alongside the window as long as he could, his hands slamming against the glass. Then, just as the train picked up speed, he suddenly punched the window right where my face was. I flinched hard, expecting the glass to shatter, but it didn't. My eyes stayed locked on his as he kept staring at me with pure hatred. His fist pressed against the glass for a few seconds before he let it slide down, leaving a smear of that dark liquid mixed with dirt. As the train pulled away, his figure grew smaller and smaller until he was just a shadow under the flickering lights of the station. When I finally turned around, I realized everyone on the train was staring at me. Some looked concerned, others just curious. An old lady was frowning at me like I had done something wrong. A teenage boy with headphones around his neck was leaning forward, watching me with wide eyes. I felt my face go hot. My hands were trembling so hard that I stuffed them into my pockets to hide it. My backpack felt heavy on my shoulders. The train rocked side to side as it sped through the dark city, lights blurring past the windows. I sat down on an empty seat near the door, still breathing fast. The smell of that man seemed to stick to my nostrils, even though he was no longer there. I tried to push away thoughts of what was in that suitcase, what that liquid was, why he was so desperate to get rid of it. I tried to imagine that maybe it was just something gross but harmless. But the truth was, it didn't feel that way. My mind kept going back to his eyes. The way he stared at me wasn't just anger. There was something desperate and empty in them, like he wasn't fully there anymore. As the train carried me further away from that station, I kept thinking about how easy it would have been for him to force me to take that bag if I had been alone on the platform. If the train hadn't come at that exact moment. The thought made me shiver. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to calm myself down. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face again, the dirt on his skin, the cuts on his arms, the way his mouth moved as he yelled things that didn't make sense. I got off a few stations later and walked home fast, checking over my shoulder every few seconds, even though I knew he wasn't there. When I got inside my apartment, I locked the door behind me and sat down on the floor, leaning against it. My legs felt too weak to stand. It took me a long time to fall asleep that night. Even now, days later, I still think about him. I think about the heaviness of that suitcase and the way that liquid dripped onto the floor in thick drops. I think about how desperate he was to get rid of it, and I think about what might have been inside. When I was a kid, I never really slept well. Every night felt like a battle. It wasn't just nightmares. Those were bad enough, sure. The ones where I'd be chased through the woods or trapped in a burning building, or those dreams where something was always watching me from the darkness and I just couldn't move. But worse than that were the night terrors. Those moments when I would wake up screaming with my chest tight, sweat pouring down my face, eyes wide open, but still seeing the dream right there in front of me. Even when I woke up, the feeling never left. I would sit up in bed for hours, staring into the dark, too afraid to close my eyes again because I knew it would only come back. Because of it all, I never really slept more than a few hours each night. My dad thought I was just making excuses to stay up late, and my mom used to rub my back until I fell asleep, thinking that would help me calm down. But nothing really did. I remember lying in bed at 3 or 4 in the morning, feeling like the world outside had stopped. It always felt like there was something waiting for me in the silence. I would hear the clock ticking in the hallway, the fridge humming in the kitchen. I would hear the old wooden beams in the house creak as they settled in the cool air of the night. Every sound felt louder in the dark, echoing in my head and making my heart beat harder. The tiredness did something to me. At school, I would nod off at my desk, my head jerking forward every few minutes, my pencil slipping out of my hand. I would see things moving at the corners of my vision all the time, mostly shadows, dark shapes darting around that would vanish the moment I turned my head. At first, it scared me every single time. I would feel a jolt run up my back, my chest tightening, my breath catching in my throat. But after a while, I just accepted it. I told myself it was just sleep deprivation, just my brain making up things that weren't there because it never got to rest. But one night, it wasn't like that. I remember it clearly because it was one of those nights where my chest felt too tight to even breathe. I had woken up after another nightmare and couldn't go back to sleep, so I decided to get a glass of water from the kitchen. Our house wasn't that big. My room was at the end of the hallway. The bathroom was on the left, my sister's room across from mine. Then the hallway opened up into the living room and kitchen. I stepped out quietly, so I wouldn't wake anyone up. The carpet under my feet felt cold and rough, and the house smelled like dust and old wood. I walked down the hallway, rubbing my eyes, trying to wake up enough to keep myself from tripping over anything. And then, halfway down the hallway, I turned my head. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I thought I heard something. Maybe I just felt that heavy feeling you get when you know someone's behind you. But when I turned, I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me again. It was tall, taller than any adult I knew. Its head almost reached the ceiling. Its body was like smoke, shifting and curling in the dim light, but it had these eyes. Bright yellow eyes that cut through the dark like headlights on a foggy road. They didn't blink. They didn't flicker. They just stared right at me. I froze. My throat closed up. My chest felt like it was being crushed from the inside. I couldn't even move. I remember my fingers were shaking, so hard the tips hurt. Every hair on my body stood up. It felt like the air around me was vibrating with something heavy and angry. I couldn't scream. I couldn't run. I just stood there, staring back at it, feeling like my knees would buckle if I tried to move. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like forever. At some point, I forced myself to blink, and when I opened my eyes again, it was gone. The hallway was empty, silent except for the ticking clock in the living room. My heart was pounding so hard I felt like I would throw up. I rushed to the kitchen, grabbed a glass, filled it with water from the sink, and sat down on the cold tile floor. I sat there for a long time, trying to breathe, trying to feel normal again. After that, I never saw it again. The nightmares kept coming, and I kept waking up in cold sweats. But that thing with the yellow eyes never showed itself again. Over time, as I got older, the nightmares faded. The night terrors stopped. I started sleeping better. I moved out, went to college, got a job. I stopped thinking about it. I stopped thinking about any of it. It became one of those memories you just stuff away in the back of your mind, like an old toy you don't care about anymore, dusty and forgotten. Years later, my dad told me something that made my skin crawl. I had been visiting home for the weekend. We were sitting in the backyard, and he started talking about the old church we used to go to. I hadn't been religious in a long time, so I didn't pay much attention at first. Then he said that back when I was having all those nightmares, he went to the church to ask for help. Apparently, the priest told him that something with yellow eyes was tormenting me. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I never told my dad about what I saw that night in the hallway. I never told anyone. To hear him say those words, to hear that the priest had described exactly what I saw without me ever saying a thing, it made my skin feel too tight for my body. I didn't sleep well that night, but like everything else, I pushed it away. I told myself it didn't matter. It was just the past. I moved on. I grew up. Life kept happening. You forget these things after a while, or at least you learn to bury them deep enough that they don't hurt anymore. A few months ago, I decided to take my little sister to see a horror movie. She's 12 now, almost 13, and she had been begging me to take her to see it since she knew I liked scary films. It was a midnight showing, and I thought it would be fun, just something we could do together. On the way back home, she was wired from the adrenaline. She kept talking about the movie, about how it wasn't even that scary, and how she had seen scarier things in real life. That made me laugh. I asked her what she meant, and she started telling me about how, when she was younger, she used to see shadow people out of the corner of her eyes all the time. I told her that was funny, because I used to see them too. We both laughed about it at first. It felt nice, like we were bonding over something strange but harmless. Then she told me about a time she was homesick from school. It was during the day, broad daylight, and she was sitting in the living room watching TV. She heard something in the hallway and turned around, expecting it to be Mom or Dad. But instead, she saw a tall, wispy silhouette with bright yellow eyes, just standing there, staring at her. When she said that, it stopped being funny. I felt something cold settle deep in my stomach, like a rock I couldn't swallow. I didn't say anything to her after that. I just nodded and changed the subject. She didn't notice anything was wrong. That night, after I dropped her off at home and drove back to my apartment, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching the headlights from passing cars move across the walls. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those yellow eyes staring back at me from the darkness. I thought about all those nights I spent as a kid, terrified out of my mind, thinking it was just my imagination. I thought about what the priest had told my dad. I thought about how I never said a word to anyone, and yet here was my sister, seeing the same thing in the same house years later. I stayed awake until the sun started coming up, until the light in the room turned from blue to gold and the shadows disappeared. When I finally got up, I walked around my apartment, checking every room, every closet, every dark corner, just to make sure nothing was there. Nothing ever was. I don't believe in ghosts anymore. I don't believe in demons or spirits or any of that. I think what I saw was a combination of exhaustion, fear, and an overactive imagination. The same things that made my sister see what she saw. Kids see shapes in the dark, and their brains fill in the blanks with monsters. Sleep deprivation does things to your eyes, makes shadows look like figures, makes lights blur into shapes. But even now, years later, I still think about those yellow eyes. I still think about how they didn't flicker, didn't blur, didn't fade away like every other shadow I ever saw. I think about how my dad was told the exact same thing I saw, without me ever telling him. And I think about my sister, sitting in the living room in the middle of the day, seeing the same thing I did. At some point, I just accepted that I'll never know what it really was. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a shape in my mind. Maybe it was something my dad made up to scare me into going to church more. Maybe my sister just heard me talking about it once and imagined it herself. Or maybe it was real, something that stayed in that house long after I left, watching whoever lived there, waiting in the dark. I don't live there anymore. Neither does my family. They moved out a while back. But sometimes, when I'm driving past that part of town late at night, I look up at the windows of that old house. I know it's stupid, but I always half expect to see two yellow eyes staring back at me through the glass. I always keep driving though. I don't slow down. I don't stop to look closer. Because deep down, I think I'm still that kid standing in the hallway, too scared to move, too scared to breathe, staring into the eyes of something I can't explain, hoping that if I don't move, it'll just leave me alone. I always liked walking alone after dark. Even as a kid, around 12 or 13, I felt a calmness in the streets when the sun was gone and the world felt quiet. It made everything slower and softer. My weekly walk to the psychiatrist was something I almost looked forward to, not because of the session itself, but because of the walk. It took me half an hour to get there, moving along the empty footpaths, under streetlights humming overhead, feeling the air turn cooler as I went further away from home. My neighborhood wasn't dangerous. People left each other alone. Even the walk itself didn't pass through any bad areas, so I never worried about anything happening. That evening was no different at first. I left home after dinner. The sky was already dark, but it wasn't too cold. I wore my hoodie, with my hands tucked in the front pocket, walking with my head slightly down. I could hear the crunch of gravel whenever my shoes stepped off the sidewalk, and I liked listening to that sound mixed with the distant buzzing of a transformer up on a pole. There weren't many cars out, only one or two passing every few minutes. I liked the silence they left behind. I was about halfway to my psychiatrist's office when I heard a car coming up from behind me. Its headlights lit up my shadow stretching forward on the pavement. I didn't look back. I kept walking like normal until the car pulled up next to me. It was an old Cadillac, black, the kind that looked like it had been on the road for decades. The windows were rolled down, and I noticed people sticking out halfway from them, yelling things at me, taunting me. Their voices felt sharp in the quiet air. There were boys and girls older than me, probably 18 or 19 or in their early 20s. I didn't look directly at them. I just kept walking, trying to pretend I couldn't hear them. I heard them laugh as they drove off ahead of me. I kept walking at my normal pace. A minute or two later, I heard their engine again. They came from behind and past me, and again they yelled things out the windows, laughing and calling me names. I didn't know any of them. I had never seen them before. Maybe they lived nearby, but none of them looked familiar. I thought they'd get bored after the second time, but another minute went by, and I heard them again. The same car, same people, same yelling. They were circling the block just to come back and harass me. That time when they passed by, I felt a tightness in my chest. My walk didn't feel peaceful anymore. I felt exposed, walking alone on the sidewalk under the streetlights while they moved freely in their car, circling me like predators. As soon as they turned the corner and disappeared from view, I stepped off the sidewalk and ducked behind some bushes in front of a house. The bushes were tall enough to cover me if I stayed low. I crouched down on my knees, breathing shallow so I wouldn't make noise rustling the leaves. I could hear the hum of an air conditioning unit near me and a dog barking faintly somewhere in the distance. A few seconds later, I heard their car approaching. I pressed myself further into the bush, feeling the cold branches scraping against my face and arms. The car came down the street slowly, their music turned down now, probably looking for me. I peeked between the leaves. They weren't yelling this time. They passed right by me and kept driving. I thought maybe they assumed I had gone into one of the houses. I waited until their car turned the next corner and the engine noise faded away. My knees were starting to hurt from crouching, so I stood up and stepped back onto the sidewalk, brushing off the leaves stuck to my hoodie. I started walking again towards my psychiatrist. I thought they had given up and driven off for good, but I had only walked for about a minute before I heard their car again. They came back, faster this time, and when they saw me, they started yelling and laughing again. It felt like knives in my ears. They turned the corner ahead of me. That's when fear really kicked in. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to run. I wasn't a fast runner, but adrenaline made me move quicker than usual. I knew they would catch up with me again soon. I didn't want to be out in the open when they came back. As I reached another block, I saw a small apartment building. There were bushes in front, wide enough to hide me. I ran straight to them and crouched behind them, trying to keep my breathing quiet. The branches scratched against my skin, and I could feel dirt under my shoes as I tried to stay low. I didn't know how long I was there. Maybe half a minute. Long enough for my heart to start hurting from how fast it was beating. Suddenly I heard a door open and I froze. I looked up and saw a man coming out of the ground floor apartment. He saw me crouching there behind his bushes. I must have looked like a burglar or some runaway kid. He asked me what I was doing there. My mouth felt dry when I tried to talk, but I told him everything in one go. That I was walking to my psychiatrist's office, and that a group of people in a car kept following me, taunting me, circling around, and I was scared they'd grab me. I didn't even realize I was crying until my voice shook. I looked up at him, and I could tell from his face he believed me. He wasn't angry. He was shirtless, but wearing a sleeveless undershirt, the kind people wear around the house. His arms were muscular, and his shoulders looked strong. He didn't have the body of someone who sat around all day. He looked serious, like he could handle himself if things went bad. Just then I heard the car again. It drove down the street and slowed down as it reached where we were. It pulled up right at the curb. There were fewer people inside now. I noticed that right away. Maybe 3 or 4 instead of the 6 or 7 I saw before. The man looked at them with a hard stare, no emotion on his face. He asked me if I knew them. I shook my head and told him no, I didn't know any of them. As the car sat there idling, I noticed movement coming from down the sidewalk. 3 people walking towards us from the other direction. 2 boys and a girl. They were part of the group. I realized what they had done. They must have gotten out of the car a few blocks away and started walking towards me while the car circled around to trap me from behind. My stomach dropped when I understood that. This wasn't just taunting anymore. They were planning something. Maybe to beat me up, maybe to drag me into their car. I didn't want to think about what else they could do. But when they saw the man standing next to me, shirtless with his muscled arms crossed, they stopped. They didn't come any closer. They just turned and walked past me towards the car and got in. No words, no taunts. They drove off without saying anything. The man kept looking down the street long after the car had turned the corner. I stood there, my knees still shaking. He offered to let me come inside his apartment until I felt safe enough to continue. He said he could walk with me part of the way if I wanted. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say yes, to stay there behind locked doors until my appointment time passed, and I could just go home. But another part of me wanted to get away from there as fast as possible. I didn't want to be late for my session either. So I told him thank you, and that I'd be okay now. I think he could see I was still scared, but he nodded and went back inside his apartment. He closed the door. I stood there looking at the closed door for a moment, wondering if I had made the wrong choice by leaving safety behind so quickly. I started walking again, this time faster, my head up, looking in every direction. Every parked car I passed made my heart beat faster. Every distant engine noise made my shoulders tighten up. But I never saw that car again. I reached my psychiatrist's office about 10 minutes later than usual. When I sat down in the chair, I felt my whole body start shaking. I told him everything that happened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he told me we needed to call the police. I didn't want to at first, but he insisted. He said it was important to have a record in case anything happened again. 2 officers came. I told them everything, trying to remember how many people were in the car, what they looked like, what color the car was. I didn't know the license plate. They took my name and contact details and said they would drive around the neighborhood to see if they could find them. That was the last I heard about it. On my way back home after my session, I didn't walk the same route. I didn't want to walk down those same streets in case they were still out there. I took different side streets, even though it made my walk longer. Every car that passed by made me stiffen up. I kept expecting to hear their voices again, but nothing happened. I reached home safely that night. After that day, I never saw those kids again. Maybe they found someone else to bother. Maybe they got bored of the area. I don't know. I still walked to my appointments after that, but I was never able to enjoy the quiet peace of nighttime walks in the same way again. Every headlight made me brace myself. Every slow-moving car made me think of that Cadillac, of those faces leaning out the windows in the darkness, laughing at my fear. I still walked, but it wasn't the same anymore. I guess that's just how it goes. Some things take away your peace for good, and you just learn to keep moving forward anyway. We got to Sumter National Forest late in the afternoon. The sky was already dark with heavy clouds, and there was a smell of wet pine and old mud in the air. My best friend, Rachel, her boyfriend James, and I had planned this camping trip for weeks. We wanted a quiet place with no crowds where we could just relax, eat junk food, and read scary stories without other people laughing around us like at state parks. But when we pulled off the narrow road and onto the forest access trail, there were no other cars. Not a single soul. It felt weird right away, like the trees themselves were watching us come in. I tried to brush it off. I told myself it would be peaceful. No screaming kids, no loud music from other campers, just us and the woods. We parked the SUV on a little clearing off the gravel trail. There was a small muddy fire pit someone had used before, but it was too wet to light any wood, so we sat in the car with the doors open, just listening to the light rain hitting the roof. I sat in the back seat reading scary stories to tell in the dark out loud, while Rachel leaned against James in the front. The sky turned dark gray to black quickly, and soon it was full night. The rain picked up, a soft, steady tapping on the metal that almost sounded like tiny footsteps coming closer and closer. Each time the wind shifted, the rain changed its sound. Sometimes it was a quiet hiss, sometimes a sharp tapping like fingernails on glass. Every time it got quiet, it made my heart race because I knew it would start again louder, almost like something was sneaking up to the car. After a while, Rachel told me to stop reading because she was getting too creeped out. I shut the book, placed it on the floor, and lay down with my sleeping bag zipped up to my neck. James turned off the overhead light. Only the sound of rain filled the car, and the darkness outside seemed endless. I closed my eyes, but every time I did, I imagined someone standing right outside my window staring at me. I forced myself not to look, telling myself it was just the stories getting to me. But the rain, it kept sounding like footsteps. Crunch, 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 like someone slowly walking around the car. I held my breath and listened carefully. The rain sounded like it was moving in a circle around us. I tried to tell myself it was just the way it fell from the trees, dripping off branches in different spots. But deep down, I felt sure someone was out there. I could feel my heart beating against my ribs, so hard it almost hurt. I turned to my side to see if Rachel or James were awake. I couldn't see them clearly in the dark, but I heard James shift in his seat. That gave me a small sense of comfort. At least I wasn't the only one awake. Suddenly there was a small snap, like a stick breaking underfoot. My stomach twisted, and I felt cold sweat on my neck. James sat up quickly. I heard him fumble for the keys and turn on the headlights. The beams cut through the dark, shining on the wet trees in front of us. I scanned the area with my eyes wide open. At first, I saw nothing but thick trunks and shiny wet leaves. But then, to the right of the car, maybe 30 or 40 feet into the woods, I saw something move. Just a quick movement between the trees. My mouth went dry instantly. James grabbed his big flashlight from the door pocket. He switched it on and pointed it into the woods. "Don't go out there," I whispered, but he had already cracked the door open. Rain splashed onto the seat. He stepped out slowly into the muddy ground, shining his light around. Rachel told him to stop too, but he didn't listen. He walked forward, the beam of his light bobbing between the tree trunks. I could hear his feet sinking into the wet leaves and mud with each step. 10 steps, 15, 20. He was getting further and further away until I could only see the glow of his flashlight in the misty rain. Then everything happened at once. The flashlight beam jerked suddenly and started shaking. I saw it swing around wildly, and then James came running back, full speed, mud spraying behind his boots. He didn't even bother to shut the flashlight off. He burst into the car, rainwater dripping from his hair and jacket. His eyes were wide, and he was breathing so hard I thought he might pass out. He slammed the door and shouted at Rachel to drive. "Just go right now." Rachel turned the key, and the engine roared to life. The tires spun in the wet dirt before grabbing onto the gravel. The car lurched forward, and we flew down the access trail, bouncing over potholes, branches scraping the sides. As we reached the end of the trail, I turned around just in time to see something break through the trees behind us. It moved fast, almost like it was charging, but the headlights only caught it for a second. It was a man, but he looked wrong. He was wearing layers and layers of filthy rags, soaked and clinging to his skinny frame. His skin was pale like he hadn't been in the sun for years. His hair was long and dark, plastered to his head with rain, and his face, it didn't look right. It looked melted, like parts of it were swollen or deformed. Rachel didn't stop driving until we were back on the main highway. The rain still came down, though it seemed lighter here without the thick tree cover. James didn't say anything for a while. He just kept looking out the window, breathing hard, wiping his face with his sleeve over and over. Finally, he told us what he saw. He said as he walked into the woods, he thought he saw a deer at first, something hunched over in the shadows. But when he pointed the flashlight at it, it stood up. It was a man. He was bent over, picking at something on the ground with his hands, digging in the mud. When the light hit him, he looked up slowly, and his eyes caught the beam. James said they didn't look like normal eyes. They were wide open, almost bulging, and completely unfocused, like he was staring through him. Then the man stood up straight and started walking toward him quickly, stumbling at first, then breaking into a run. James turned and ran before he could see what the man would do next. He said the man didn't make any noise, no shouting, no talking, just silent except for the sound of his feet slapping against the wet leaves as he charged forward. James said the worst part wasn't how he looked, though. It was the smell. Even in the rain, he smelled rotten, like meat left out for weeks, mixed with wet earth and old garbage. The smell hit him the second the man stood up. We drove for about 20 minutes until we found a Piggly Wiggly grocery store parking lot on the edge of a small town. It was closed for the night, but there were lights in the lot, bright and comforting. We parked near the entrance and turned off the engine. None of us said a word for a long time. I could hear the ticking of the cooling engine and the rain tapping lightly on the roof as the storm moved away. We sat there in silence, all three of us awake, staring out the windows at the wet pavement and dark storefronts. Eventually the sun started to come up behind the trees. It was a gray, tired-looking dawn. My eyes felt like they had sand in them from staying up all night. Rachel drove us to a diner for breakfast, and none of us ate much. James just stared at his coffee, and Rachel kept rubbing her arms like she was still cold. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My face looked pale and hollow, like I hadn't slept in days. We never talked about that night again. Sometimes Rachel and I will mention the camping trip, but we skip over the part about what happened in the woods. James doesn't even like driving near forests anymore. He says he still sees that face in his dreams. Part of me wonders what would have happened if James hadn't run, if the man had gotten close enough to touch him. I try not to think about it too long because it makes my chest tighten and my breathing go shallow. It makes me feel the same way I felt sitting in the back of that SUV, listening to the rain turn into footsteps in the dark. After that, I never went camping in places with no other people. I always choose busy campgrounds with other families, screaming kids, barking dogs, cars coming and going. Some people hate that noise, but to me it means safety. It means if something happens, there will be someone else there to see it, someone else there to help. Because when you're alone in the dark woods at night, and you hear footsteps that aren't yours, all you can think about is how far you are from anyone who could save you. That man is probably still out there somewhere, walking those woods in his rotten clothes, skin sagging off his bones, eyes blank and empty, moving quietly between the trees while the rain hides the sound of his steps. Sometimes when it rains at night, I lay awake listening, just to make sure the footsteps are only in my memory and not outside my window, coming closer, step by step by step. When I think back to when I was 10 years old, living in Thailand with my sister, I can still feel that heavy warmth of the air and smell the thick humidity mixed with jasmine and stagnant water. Our house was big, at least to me back then. It was a 2-story place painted white with yellow trim around the windows. The outside walls felt almost soft to the touch because of the heat and damp air, like it was sweating all the time. The driveway was a cracked cement slab with weeds growing up through the splits, and the backyard fence was old and dark brown, leaning in some places like it was tired of standing up. Inside, it was cooler. The floors were shiny, beige marble tiles that always felt a little wet under my feet, even though they were clean. We had a maid who came every day except Sundays. Her name was Ploy. She was small, had her hair tied back tight, and wore the same navy skirt and white blouse every day. She always yelled at us for little things, like leaving our water cups around the house or dragging our backpacks across the floor. But one thing she yelled about the most was leaving the ceiling fan on in the empty room upstairs. She would always snap at us about it, saying we were wasting electricity, but me and my sister never went into that room. We never turned the fan on. It was confusing, but we just listened and nodded. Our room was right next to it. We shared a bedroom with 2 small single beds pushed against opposite walls. Between our room and the empty one was a Jack and Jill bathroom. The bathroom smelled like bleach and mint toothpaste. The tiles were pink and chipped, and the mirror above the sink had small brown spots where the silver backing was peeling off. Sometimes at night, I would stare into that mirror while brushing my teeth and feel like something was standing behind me, just out of my view. I never turned to check. I would just spit the toothpaste foam out quickly and run to my bed. That empty room always felt strange. Even when the maid cleaned it, dust gathered back so fast, like the air was thick in there. It had a ceiling fan with wooden blades and brass edges, and there was one big armoire on the far wall, an old dark one with carved patterns on the doors that looked like twisted vines. There was also a simple thin blue rug in the middle of the room and a small wooden side table. No one used that room. It was meant to be a guest room, but no guests ever stayed in it. My parents never went in there either. They always kept the door closed. One night, before we ever heard the noises, my sister and I had a friend sleep over. Her name was Anna. She was also 10, thin like my sister, with long black hair that she tied into a braid that reached her waist. That night, we decided to make blanket tents in the empty room. My sister brought pillows and flashlights, and I brought some crackers and Milo packets to eat. Anna was excited, saying how cool the room felt because it was empty and quiet. We pushed chairs together, draped blankets over them, and crawled inside with our snacks and flashlights. At first, it was fun. We shined the lights on each other's faces and made ghost shapes with our fingers against the thin blanket walls. We giggled and told small scary stories we'd heard at school, but they were silly and not very scary. After a while, we lay down on our backs, staring at the faint shadows on the blankets. The air felt still and heavy. The ceiling fan above us was off. The only sound was from the cicadas outside buzzing loudly in the trees. I remember feeling like the air was pressing down on me, making me sleepy and uncomfortable at the same time. Then we heard something. It started as a light scratch against the far wall where the armoire stood. At first, I thought it was just a rat or gecko crawling, but the sound grew sharper and longer, like nails dragging across the plaster. We all froze. None of us spoke. I could hear Anna's breath shaking next to me. The scratching moved from the wall to the floor, and then to the armoire itself. It was a slow dragging noise on the wooden doors, like something was lightly raking its claws along the carved vines. My heart was thumping so loud I could hear it in my ears. The blanket tent suddenly felt too small, too hot, too dark. Then, the armoire doors squeaked. It was a long, deep squeak that echoed in the empty room. I remember seeing the blanket shaking from where Anna's hand grabbed my arm, so hard her nails dug into my skin. The squeaking stopped, but I couldn't breathe properly. I felt like my chest was being pushed down by something heavy. Then the doors of the armoire creaked open, just a little, but enough that we could hear the hinges strain under the weight. That was it. All three of us burst out of the tent, crawling over each other, knocking over chairs and blankets. I ran so fast out the door, I nearly tripped on the rug. We didn't even look back. We ran straight into our bedroom, slammed the door, and jumped into my bed together. None of us spoke that night. We didn't even turn the lights off. We just lay there shaking until sleep finally pulled us under like drowning in warm water. After that night, we never played in that room again. But things got worse. That was the first time something actually happened in front of us. Before that, we only heard sounds. We would be downstairs eating dinner or watching cartoons, and we would hear faint thumping noises coming from upstairs. It sounded like kids running across the room, their small feet slapping against the floor tiles. Sometimes we heard balls bouncing, small rubber balls hitting the ground again and again with quick echoes, then silence, then laughter. Soft laughter. But when we went upstairs, everything would be quiet. The fan would be spinning slowly, even though we never touched the switch. The maid kept yelling at us for leaving it on. She started to look tired and angry all the time. She stopped cleaning that room properly. I think she was scared too. She would just dust near the door and then leave quickly. Once, I saw her whispering something under her breath while looking at the armoire, but when she saw me watching, she turned away fast and told me to go back to my room. One evening, after weeks of these sounds, I asked my mom if she ever heard them. She just frowned and told me not to play upstairs too loudly before dinner. My dad never said anything. He was always busy with work, coming home late, eating dinner quietly, and going to sleep. My sister stopped talking about it too. We just pretended nothing happened, but at night I would lie awake, listening to the running and the bouncing balls and that soft, sad laughter. Months later, when it was the dry season and the air felt dusty and rough on my skin, I went outside to the backyard. The fence was covered in dark green moss and vines. On the other side was the swamp. It stretched out like a dirty green blanket. It smelled like rotting plants and mud, and sometimes, when the wind blew just right, that smell would come into our house and fill the halls with that sickly sweet rot. Local people avoided it. Even the kids in the neighborhood never played near it. One day, our driver, an old man with dark cracked skin and a thin mustache, told me and my sister not to go near the swamp. He said bad things happened there. When I asked what he meant, he just shook his head and told us that long ago, people would dump their babies there if they couldn't keep them. I didn't understand fully back then, but I remember feeling sick in my stomach. Later, when I was older, I realized what he meant. That swamp was where unwanted babies were thrown away like trash. That thought haunted me more than any noise from that empty room. I started to think about the sounds we heard, the running feet, the bouncing balls, the laughter. It made sense in a sad and horrible way. After that, whenever I heard the noises at night, I didn't feel scared anymore. I felt heavy and sad. I imagined little children, stuck there, playing in the only place they could, the empty room with the dusty armoire. Maybe the scratching we heard was just them trying to play with us. Maybe they were just trying to open the armoire doors because they thought there were toys inside. Maybe that room was the only place they felt safe. Years later, when we moved out, I remember standing in that empty room one last time. The fan was off. The armoire was closed. The room smelled like dust and old wood. The sun came through the thin white curtains, making little patterns on the floor. It looked peaceful. I remember standing there, feeling that heavy air pressing against my skin, and I whispered a small goodbye under my breath. I didn't feel scared anymore. I just felt sad for whoever was left behind. Now, as an adult, I still think about that house sometimes. I can still hear the laughter and the bouncing balls if I close my eyes and think hard enough. I never tell anyone about it. It's one of those memories that feel too big and too quiet to share properly. But I know it happened. I know what I heard. I know what I felt. That house in Thailand will always be part of me. A reminder of how heavy sadness can feel when it fills a room and has nowhere else to go. I never thought a day that started so normal could end up being the worst day of my life. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had work early in the morning, and I hated Tuesdays the most. They felt pointless, like a repeat of Monday, but without any energy left. I worked construction at the time, mostly cement work, sometimes roofing. That day was mostly roofing and cleaning up broken tiles off an old apartment block in the west side of town. By the time I got off work, my back felt like it was made of wood, stiff and heavy, and my neck burned from being in the sun all day. My shirt was stained with sweat around the chest and armpits. When I got in my car, I could feel the seatbelt burn my shoulder from the heat. I turned the AC on full blast and just sat there, eyes closed, letting the cold air blow against my skin. I didn't even care that the air smelled dusty and old. I sat there for 5 minutes, unmoving, until the sweat on my back turned cold and made me shiver. I drove home the usual way. It takes me about 15 minutes to get home if there's no traffic. That day there was some, but not enough to annoy me. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw the neighbor's kid playing basketball alone in front of their garage. I always felt sorry for that boy. He didn't have any friends in the area, and his parents never came out to play with him. He just played alone until it got too dark to see the hoop. I nodded at him when I walked inside. I lived alone in a small single-floor house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, living room, and a kitchen that was too small to fit a proper table. I threw my boots off at the door, peeled my socks off because they were wet with sweat, and walked barefoot across the cold tile. I could feel pieces of dirt and grit stick to my soles, but I didn't care. I just needed a shower. The hot water felt good on my neck. I stood there longer than usual, just letting it run down my back, eyes closed, thinking about nothing. When I came out, I wrapped a towel around my waist and walked to the kitchen. I opened the fridge. There was leftover pizza from 2 nights ago, half a bottle of water, and an old apple that was turning brown on one side. I took the pizza and ate it cold while standing there, leaning against the counter, staring at nothing. After that, I went to my room, lay down on my bed, and closed my eyes. I didn't sleep, but I rested there, breathing slow, feeling my heartbeat in my chest, and thinking about how I had to go to work again tomorrow. The ceiling fan above me spun slowly. It squeaked at a certain spot every time it turned, and I counted the squeaks in my head to pass time. Eventually I got bored and got up. It was around 6 in the evening when I decided to go for a walk. I had this small trail I liked to go to behind my house. It wasn't an official trail. It was more like a dirt path that kids used for bikes and quads, and it cut through a patch of trees and bushes before connecting to the back of an abandoned golf course. The golf course had been closed for years, so the grass was overgrown and trees had started creeping onto the fairways. Some people said it was dangerous to go there alone because of coyotes or meth heads camping out, but I had never seen anyone there. I liked it because it was quiet. I put on a t-shirt and my old running shoes. Didn't bother with socks. The sun was setting, but there was still enough light to see the dirt path clearly. As I stepped onto it, I could hear the crunch of dry leaves under my shoes. It felt good to stretch my legs, especially after standing on a roof all day. The air smelled dry, like dust and grass mixed together. There was a warm breeze that blew through the trees, rustling the dry branches. I walked with my hands in my pockets, kicking small rocks off the trail as I went. After about 15 minutes, the path opened up onto the golf course. I stepped onto what used to be a fairway. Now it was just waist-high grass with patches of thistle plants and small trees growing randomly. I walked along the edge of it, near the tree line. I liked being near the trees. It made me feel hidden, like I could disappear if I wanted to. As I walked, I heard a rustle up ahead. I stopped and scanned the grass, thinking it might be a rabbit or a stray dog. But I didn't see anything, so I kept walking. I must have walked for another 10 minutes when I saw something strange up ahead. It looked like a white shape lying in the grass, half hidden by the tall weeds. I squinted and stepped closer, feeling the hair on my arms rise up for no reason. As I got closer, I saw it was a car. An old white sedan, covered in dirt and pollen, weeds growing around its tires. The windows were rolled up and fogged on the inside. The doors were closed, and it looked like it had been there for months. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at it. There was no path leading to it, no tire tracks in the dirt. It was as if it had been dropped from the sky and left there to rot. I felt an uneasy feeling in my stomach, but curiosity was stronger. I walked around it slowly, keeping a few feet of distance, just in case. The windshield had a thick layer of dirt, and I wiped a spot with my sleeve to look inside. At first I didn't see anything. The windows were tinted, and the dirt made it hard to see. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw the outline of a shape in the driver's seat. It was slumped forward, head resting against the steering wheel. I felt a shock run through my chest. I moved back quickly, nearly tripping over a weed. My mouth felt dry. I swallowed and forced myself to look again. It was a person, or what used to be a person. Their hair was long and greasy, hanging forward to cover their face. Their clothes were dark and wrinkled. The car was locked from the inside. I tried the handle, but it didn't budge. I knocked on the window lightly, not even knowing why I did that. The person didn't move. I felt like I was going to throw up. The smell of old rot hit me even through the closed windows. I stepped back and took a deep breath through my mouth. I stood there for a long time, trying to decide what to do. I didn't have my phone on me. I never took it on walks. I turned and walked back the way I came, this time walking faster, almost jogging. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting the car to vanish or the person to suddenly stand up and get out. But nothing moved behind me except the grass and the wind. When I got home, I grabbed my phone and called the non-emergency police number. I didn't know what else to do. They told me to wait at home and an officer would come talk to me. I sat on my front steps, staring at the street as the sun set and the streetlights flickered on one by one. The neighbor's kid was gone. The street was empty and quiet. About 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. An officer got out, an older man with gray hair at his temples. He asked me to describe what I saw, so I told him everything, from the walk to finding the car. He wrote it down on a small notepad and nodded. Then he asked me to show him where it was. I grabbed a flashlight and we walked there together. The whole walk there, I felt like I was in a dream. The trees looked different in the fading light, like tall, thin shadows reaching up to the sky. The grass whispered against my legs as I walked. I kept thinking about the smell of rot trapped inside that car. When we reached the car, the officer walked around it slowly, shining his flashlight inside. I stood a few feet away, hugging myself against the cold breeze. He radioed something in, and soon another cruiser showed up, then an ambulance, even though it was too late for that person. The paramedics didn't do much except look inside and talk to the officer. Another officer came and asked me questions again, same ones as before. I answered them, staring at the ground, feeling like I was watching myself from somewhere far away. Eventually they thanked me for reporting it and told me I could go home. I walked back under the dark sky, stars bright above me. My legs felt heavy and weak. When I got home, I locked the door behind me, took off my shoes, and sat on the edge of my bed staring at the floor for a long time. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, I thought about how that person ended up there. Did they drive themselves there and decide to end it all? Did someone else leave them there? How long had they been there, rotting in the sun while people walked by without ever noticing? It scared me to think about how invisible a person could become, how easy it was to vanish from the world without anyone noticing for weeks, months, maybe even years. I thought about that person sitting in their car alone, staring out at the grass as the sun set for the last time. I wondered if they felt the same emptiness I felt every day, if they felt like there was no point in anything anymore. That night I didn't sleep. I just lay there listening to the squeak of the fan, thinking about the shape slumped over the wheel, thinking about how easy it would be to go out the same way, thinking about how no one would even notice until it was too late. In the morning, I called in sick to work. I didn't leave the house all day. I just sat in my living room, staring out the window at the street, watching the neighbor's kid shoot hoops alone in front of his garage, the ball bouncing over and over on the cracked driveway, echoing like a slow, sad heartbeat. I kept thinking about that car, that person, and the smell of old rot trapped behind tinted glass. I knew I'd never take that walk again. I woke up before sunrise that morning because I wanted to get a head start on my day. I wasn't working that week, so I decided to finally go explore a trail I'd been meaning to check out for months. It was only about a 40-minute drive from my apartment, tucked behind a quiet town that barely had a gas station and one small grocery shop. I packed a quick breakfast, just 2 peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in foil and a bottle of water, and left while the sky was still dark and empty of any hint of light. The road there was silent and almost felt like it belonged in a dream. The only thing I saw the whole way was a raccoon waddling across the asphalt, its eyes glowing like small torches in my headlights. When I got to the trailhead, it was empty. There wasn't even another car parked there, which made me feel a bit nervous. I'm used to seeing at least 1 or 2 early morning hikers, but this time, it was just me and the trees. I put my backpack on and stepped out into the cool air. The gravel under my boots crunched louder than usual, echoing off the bare wooden sign that had the name of the trail carved into it. I tightened the straps on my shoulders, zipped my light jacket up to my neck, and started walking. The path went straight into the forest, lined with thin pine trees that grew closer and closer together the further I went. At first, it was peaceful. All I could hear was the wind brushing against the treetops and a few birds starting to wake up. But after about an hour of walking, I realized how alone I was out there. The sun had come up fully by then, but its light barely reached the forest floor because of how thick the trees were. I kept checking behind me, even though I knew no one was there. Every time I looked, I saw the same thing, a long empty path with flickers of light cutting through the trees. I told myself to focus on my steps and keep going because the trail was supposed to loop around after about 5 miles. I had done hikes like this before, and as long as I followed the markers nailed to trees, I would come right back to where I started. After a while, I stopped to drink some water. I sat down on a fallen log and ate one of my sandwiches slowly. It was quiet enough to hear the distant hum of insects around me, but nothing else. I remember thinking that if I screamed, nobody would hear me out there. It wasn't a scary thought at first, just a passing idea in my mind. But as I sat there, finishing my food and listening to the wind, it started to bother me. I felt my chest tighten a bit, and I decided to keep moving. About another half hour down the trail, I saw something strange ahead. At first, I thought it was a tree that had fallen across the path, but as I got closer, I realized it was an old fence. It was rusty and leaning sideways, with parts of the wood eaten away by moss and rain. I didn't remember seeing it on the trail map, but I was sure the path went straight through it. I stepped over the broken part and kept going. The forest past the fence felt different. The trees were bigger, older, and covered in thick green moss that dripped down their trunks. The smell was different, too damp and almost sour, like wet leaves left in a pile for too long. I walked for what felt like another hour, but I stopped seeing trail markers. I looked around every few steps, expecting to see the small yellow diamond nailed to a tree, but there was nothing. I told myself maybe I just missed one and kept going, but after a while, I realized I was no longer on the trail at all. I pulled out my phone to check my location, but there was no signal. The battery was still full, but it didn't matter if it couldn't load a map. I stood there for a long time, trying to decide what to do. Finally, I turned around and started walking back the way I thought I came. But after only 10 minutes, the trees looked different again. Nothing felt familiar. Every direction looked the same. Dark tree trunks with patches of moss, ground covered in rotting pine needles, small twigs snapping under my boots with every step. My breathing got faster, and I felt sweat running down my back, even though it was still cool outside. I tried to calm myself down by walking slowly, thinking maybe I just needed to retrace my steps carefully. But as I walked, I saw something up ahead that made me stop. It was a small campsite. There was an old, torn blue tent set up under a tree, sagging down in the middle from where the rain had pooled over time. Next to it was a fire pit with burned pieces of wood still sitting in a circle. Everything was covered in dead leaves. The tent looked like it hadn't been touched in months, maybe years. I stood there staring at it for a long time. I didn't want to go near it, but at the same time, I felt like I needed to check if anyone was inside. I walked slowly up to the tent, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached it, I bent down and pulled the zipper a few inches open. The smell hit me immediately, mold, old dirt, and something else that made my stomach twist. Inside, there was just an old sleeping bag, half unzipped and covered in dark stains I couldn't quite identify. There were empty cans of food lined up against the inside wall, and the ground was littered with small scraps of plastic and wrappers. I zipped it back up and stepped away, feeling my heartbeat in my throat. I didn't want to think about who had left it like that or why it was still there. I turned around and started walking again, moving faster now. Every few minutes I thought I heard something behind me, a branch snapping, the rustle of dry leaves, but when I turned, there was nothing there. I told myself it was probably just animals, but it didn't make me feel any better. After what felt like hours of walking, I finally saw something through the trees. It was the fence I had crossed earlier. Relief rushed through me so hard I almost felt dizzy. I stepped over it quickly and kept going down the path, hoping I was finally going the right way. I walked for a long time, ignoring the ache in my feet and the burning in my calves. The sky above was starting to turn a bit darker, showing that evening was coming. I didn't want to be out there when the sun went down. Eventually, I started seeing trail markers again. My chest loosened with every one I passed. I kept going, barely stopping to drink water, until finally I saw the small wooden sign at the start of the trail. My car was still there, sitting alone in the gravel lot. I felt tears burning in my eyes as I walked to it and unlocked the door with shaking hands. When I got inside, I just sat there for a long time with my hands gripping the steering wheel. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the lot. My legs felt like jelly, and I realized how thirsty and hungry I was. I hadn't eaten since the morning, but my stomach was so tight I didn't feel hungry at all. I started the engine and drove away, glancing at the forest in my rearview mirror as I left. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about that campsite. I kept wondering who had been there, what had happened to them, and why everything was left behind like that. When I finally pulled into my apartment parking lot, it was completely dark. I grabbed my backpack, locked the car, and went inside. As soon as I shut the door, I felt like I could breathe again. That night, I lay in bed with the light on. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the tent in my mind. The sagging blue fabric, the dark stains on the sleeping bag, the smell that filled my nose when I unzipped it. I kept thinking about the sounds I heard behind me as I walked back. Maybe it really was just animals. Or maybe it wasn't. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about how quiet it was out there, how no one would have heard me if something had happened. I never went back to that trail again. Even now, every time I drive past that exit on the highway, I feel my hands grip the steering wheel a little tighter. A week later, I read an article online about an old missing persons case from that area. The photo showed a man in his late 30s with a rough beard and tired eyes. He had gone missing 2 years earlier, last seen hiking that same trail. Police said his car had been left in the parking lot for over a month before they towed it away. They never found him. I didn't tell anyone about the campsite I found. I didn't want to think about it anymore. But sometimes, when I can't sleep at night, I see his face in my mind, and I wonder if he's still out there somewhere, deep in those woods, under the mossy trees where nobody can hear you scream. And I wonder if I would have ever made it back if I hadn't turned around when I did. I woke up before sunrise. My eyes felt heavy and my body felt stiff, but I forced myself up. I was going hunting alone for the first time in a while. I used to go a lot when I was younger, but with work getting busier, I hardly had time. That morning I felt like I needed it. I packed my old rucksack with 2 bottles of water, some jerky, an apple, and a small first aid kit. I checked the batteries in my headlamp, even though the sun would be up soon. I strapped on my boots, feeling the worn leather around my ankles. I grabbed my rifle case and walked out into the chilly dawn air. The gravel under my tires crackled as I drove down the long dirt road that led to the public hunting land. It was an area I knew well. It was mostly hardwoods with a couple old logging roads weaving through the ridges. There was a small creek that cut down the middle and a swampy flat where deer liked to bed down. As I parked the truck near the rusted gate, I sat for a moment with the engine off, listening. The world was waking up slow. I heard birds starting to chirp and the soft rustle of wind moving through the tall oaks. I locked my truck and walked in under the orange-pink sky. My boots made a quiet crunch on the path. I walked for a while, breathing in the smell of wet leaves and mud. The woods felt empty at first, just calm and peaceful. I passed the bend in the old logging road where the creek cuts under through a steel culvert. There were raccoon tracks in the soft dirt. I kept walking another half-mile to get deeper in. Somewhere I felt deer wouldn't have been spooked by early hunters driving in. As I moved off the road and into the woods, the ground felt uneven with roots and rocks under the leaves. I found a downed tree and decided to sit there for a while. I set my pack down and pulled out the apple, biting into it slowly. My eyes scanned the forest ahead, the rifle across my knees. The air was still cold, but my body felt warm under my jacket. Time passed slowly. The sun rose higher and light filtered down through the trees. I heard squirrels fighting over something behind me. I watched two woodpeckers take turns hammering at an old dead tree. The world felt simple out there. No phones ringing, no people, just the quiet, steady sound of wind and birds and little animals going about their morning. I sat there for a few hours, but saw nothing worth shooting. Around 10 a.m., I decided to move deeper in, towards the swamp flats. I picked up my pack and walked east. The ground got softer and wetter as I approached the area where the creek overflowed. Tall reeds and grasses grew in thick bunches. I could smell the sour, earthy smell of wet mud and old water. Frogs leapt away as I stepped between puddles. I felt sweat gathering on my back and under my hat brim. I kept moving carefully, checking for deer beds. I saw old tracks in the mud, but nothing fresh. As I walked through a tight stand of willow trees, I suddenly felt that feeling of being watched. My body went still. I stood there, looking around slow. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I brushed it off, thinking I was just being paranoid alone in the woods. I walked on. The ground turned drier as I climbed up a small ridge that overlooked the swamp flat. From there I could see far across the marsh. I sat down on a mossy log, laid my rifle across my lap, and rested for a bit. The wind blew up the ridge and cooled the sweat on my neck. I felt relaxed again, enjoying the quiet. After half an hour, I stood up to stretch. That's when I heard it. A branch snapped somewhere behind me. It wasn't a squirrel snap or a bird flutter. It was heavy. My heart thumped hard in my chest. I turned around slow, scanning between the thick tree trunks. I saw nothing at first. I waited, barely breathing, listening for movement. Then I saw it. About 50 yards behind me, just off the ridge, stood a man. He was wearing a tan jacket and dark pants. He had a beard and a gray cap pulled down low. He stood half behind a tree, but I could see his shoulder and part of his face. He wasn't moving, just standing there staring at me. My stomach turned cold. I didn't wave or call out. Something about him standing so still, so quiet, felt wrong. I turned my body fully towards him and waited. He didn't move, didn't raise a hand, didn't nod, just stared. I felt sweat start to drip down my back again, but this time it was cold. I thought maybe he was another hunter. But any normal hunter would have waved or nodded to show they weren't sneaking up. I kept staring, waiting for him to move. He didn't. The silence felt too deep. The birds that had been singing went quiet. The only sound was the wind brushing past my ears. I felt exposed up on that ridge, so I stepped down, keeping my eyes on him as I moved to the side for cover behind a tree. I peeked around, but he was gone. The space where he'd been was empty now. My throat felt dry. I told myself he must have turned and walked off, but I hadn't heard a single step or branch snap. The leaves were dry. Anyone walking would have made noise. I stayed still for a while waiting. Then I decided I'd had enough. I didn't want to hunt anymore. My gut told me it was time to leave. I slung my rifle on my shoulder and walked back towards the logging road. I kept checking behind me every few steps. My heart was thudding heavy in my chest. Every dark shape between trees looked like him for a moment before my brain realized it was just a stump or shadow. I walked fast but careful, trying not to make too much noise but wanting to get out. When I reached the logging road, I felt a bit of relief. I turned left to head back towards my truck. The road felt wide and safe compared to the thick woods. I walked with a faster pace, listening to my boots crunch on gravel and dirt. After 10 minutes, I saw something up ahead. At first, I thought it was just a stump or a bush on the edge of the road. As I got closer, I saw it was a person crouched down, facing away from me. It was the same man. Tan jacket, gray cap. He was crouched low with his hands near the ground, like he was tying his boot or looking at something. I stopped walking. My mouth went dry. I felt my body screaming to turn and run back into the woods, but I forced myself to stay calm. I watched him. He didn't move, just stayed there crouched. I couldn't hear him breathing or moving. The forest felt silent again. I stepped backwards, trying to make no noise, and slipped into the trees off the road. I moved quietly through the undergrowth, putting distance between me and him while staying hidden. I angled my way through the woods until I saw the glint of my truck windshield in the distance. Relief flooded my chest. I pushed through the last few yards of brush and reached the open area where I'd parked. I walked fast to my truck, unlocked it with shaking hands, and threw my pack and rifle into the back seat. I climbed in and locked the doors. My hands were trembling as I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I put it in drive and started moving, gravel spraying under my tires. I checked the rear-view mirror, but saw nothing behind me but trees and the dirt road fading away. As I drove down the long road back towards the highway, I kept checking my mirrors. My body felt like it was buzzing with leftover fear. When I reached the highway, I pulled over for a minute. My hands were still shaking on the wheel. I sat there, staring out at the empty road, breathing slow, trying to calm myself down. I didn't go hunting again for months after that. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Even now, I don't fully understand it. Maybe it was just some other guy out there who liked being creepy. Maybe he was harmless. But the way he stood there staring, the way he appeared again further up the road without me hearing a single step, it didn't feel right. It felt like he wanted me to see him, like he wanted me to feel afraid. After that day, whenever I went back into the woods, I always felt like someone was watching me from behind a tree. Even when I knew I was alone, I never felt completely safe out there again. The forest didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like a place where people could disappear without a sound, and no one would ever know what happened to them. I still think about him sometimes. The way he just stood there. The way the woods went silent around him. I think about how easily I could have disappeared that day if I hadn't left when I did. I think about how no one would have found me until it was too late. I don't know what he was doing out there or what he wanted, but I know one thing for sure. I never want to see him again. I woke up before sunrise that morning. I remember my eyes burned from how little sleep I got. I sat up in my small bed with the thin sheet tangled around my ankles. My room was warm and silent. I could hear the old ceiling fan above me clicking softly as it spun. I looked over at my phone and saw it was only 4:37 a.m. I knew I couldn't go back to sleep. I had that feeling in my chest like there was something important I needed to do, but I couldn't remember what. My head felt heavy, my eyes felt sticky, and my body felt weak, but I forced myself to stand up. I moved to the window and pulled the curtain back. It was dark outside, just a few streetlights glowing down the empty road. The world felt silent in a way that felt wrong, like the silence was too big for such a small hour. I went to the kitchen to get water. The tiles felt cold under my bare feet. The kitchen smelled like old bread and dish soap. I drank 2 full glasses of water, letting the coldness wake me up. After a while, I decided to go for a walk. I didn't know why. I put on my shoes without socks and pulled a hoodie over my thin t-shirt. The air outside felt warm, but there was a strange coolness to it. The sky was black with just a hint of blue trying to push through. I started walking down the street. The shops were all closed. Metal shutters pulled down over the windows. I walked past them, hearing the echo of my own steps. Every step felt louder than it should have been. I kept looking behind me even though there was no one there. I walked until I reached the edge of town. There was a trail there that went into the woods. I never liked that trail. It always looked dark and damp, even in the afternoon. But something about that morning made me turn onto it. The gravel crunched under my feet. The trees were thick and grew so close to each other their branches tangled together above the trail, blocking out the sky. It felt like I was walking into a cave made of wood. The deeper I went, the colder it got. I started to feel that crawling feeling up the back of my neck. I kept imagining someone was behind me, just out of sight, matching my steps perfectly. Every few minutes I would stop and turn around, heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. But there was never anything there. Just the empty trail and the tight wall of trees on both sides. I walked for what felt like an hour until I came to the old stone bridge. It crossed a narrow creek that barely had any water left in it. I walked onto the bridge and leaned on the side, looking down at the rocks below. My breath came out shaky. I was sweating under my hoodie even though the air was cold. I stood there for a long time, just listening to the wind move through the trees. There were no birds, no insects, no sounds at all except the wind. After a while I kept walking. The trail narrowed as it climbed up a small hill. At the top, the trees opened up a bit, and I could see down into a shallow valley. I stopped and stood there looking down. The valley was covered in dead grass and fallen branches. In the middle of it, there was an old shed. I never saw it before. The wood was gray and broken in places. The door hung off one hinge and swung slightly in the breeze. I didn't want to go down there, but my feet started moving before I could think about it. I walked down the slope slowly, careful not to slip on the loose dirt. As I got closer to the shed, the smell hit me. It was sharp and thick, like rotting leaves mixed with something sweet. My stomach turned, but I kept going. The grass brushed against my legs and left small cuts on my shins. I reached the shed and stood in front of the doorway. It was dark inside, too dark to see anything. The smell was stronger there, almost like it was coming from inside. My chest felt tight, and I felt a sharp pain in my temple, like my body was warning me not to go in. But I stepped forward and pushed the broken door aside. It creaked loud, the sound cutting through the quiet like a scream. Inside, it was dark and cramped. The floor was dirt. Old broken tools hung on the walls. There was a small table in the corner with something on it covered by a dirty cloth. I didn't want to go near it. I kept my eyes on the ground and tried to breathe through my mouth. The air tasted like metal. I turned to leave, but then I heard something. It was faint, almost silent, but it was there. A soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the dirt floor. My heart froze in my chest. I felt cold sweat drip down my back. I couldn't move. The scraping stopped for a moment, then started again, a little louder this time. I forced myself to turn my head. In the far corner of the shed, I saw it. There was a hole in the ground, just wide enough for a person to fit through. The dirt around it was fresh, like it had just been dug up. The scraping sound was coming from inside that hole. I felt my knees go weak. My vision went blurry at the edges. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't listen. The scraping stopped again. The silence was louder than the noise. I felt like if I waited even one more second, something was going to come out of that hole. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I turned and ran out of the shed, nearly tripping on the broken door. I sprinted through the dead grass and climbed up the slope as fast as I could. My chest burned. My lungs felt like they were filled with knives. I kept running up the trail, branches whipping against my arms and face. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. The feeling of being watched was so strong it felt like actual hands were reaching for me. I ran until I reached the stone bridge. I stopped there, doubled over, trying to catch my breath. My legs were shaking so bad, I thought I would collapse. After a few minutes, I started walking again. I didn't run, but I walked as fast as I could. The sky was brighter now, a dull gray light filling the spaces between the trees. I kept walking until I reached the edge of the woods and stepped back onto the road. The sun was just starting to rise, turning the sky a pale orange. The street was still empty. Everything looked normal again. Quiet, still safe. I walked back to my house. My legs felt like they were made of wet paper. When I got inside, I locked the door and went straight to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, my hair was stuck to my forehead with sweat, and there were small cuts all over my cheeks from the branches. My eyes looked empty, like they weren't mine. I didn't go to sleep. I didn't even take off my shoes. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the floor for hours. My body felt numb, but my heart wouldn't slow down. Later that afternoon, I went online and searched for any information about that shed. I searched maps and old news articles. I didn't find anything. There was no record of a shed in those woods. No record of anyone owning that land or building anything there. I knew I didn't imagine it. The cuts on my shins burned when I touched them. My hoodie smelled like rotting leaves. But no one believed me when I told them. They laughed and said I probably just fell asleep and had a bad dream. But I knew it was real. I still see that shed every time I close my eyes. I still hear the scraping sound in the quiet of the night. I don't go near those woods anymore. I don't go for early walks anymore. Sometimes, when the wind is strong and coming from the south, I can smell it again. That sharp, sweet smell of rotting leaves mixed with something else. When that happens, I close all my windows and sit on the floor with my back to the wall. I sit there for hours, waiting for the smell to go away. Because I know that smell. I know what it means. It means whatever is in that hole is still down there, waiting for someone to come back. And it means that one day, I might smell it close. So close that when I turn around, it won't just be a smell anymore. That's why I never go out before sunrise now. Because some things hide in the dark not because they're scared of the light, but because they're waiting for the right moment to come out. And I don't want to be there when it does. I woke up that morning before the sun came up. I could see a bit of blue-gray light coming in from my small window. The room felt cold, even though it was midsummer. I lay there staring at the ceiling for a while, thinking about what I had planned for the day. I had a full day off work, which didn't happen often, so I planned to go fishing at the lake about 30 minutes from town. I packed my fishing rod tackle box, a small cooler with 2 bottles of water, a sandwich wrapped in foil, and a bag of chips. I didn't bother making coffee because I planned to grab one from the gas station on the way out. The roads were empty. I drove with the window down, feeling the cold morning breeze hitting my face, keeping me awake. When I reached the gas station, there was only one old man inside, standing near the fridge looking at milk cartons. I grabbed a coffee, paid for it, and went back out to my truck. The sky was getting lighter now, a dull orange glow sitting low above the hills. I felt calm. It was quiet in the way early mornings usually are, when most of the world is still asleep. I drove along the narrow road leading to the lake. The road curved through the hills, and there were patches where trees grew so close that their branches scraped my side mirrors. At some point I slowed down to avoid hitting a squirrel that darted across. The lake was down in a shallow valley, surrounded by thick trees and reeds growing along the water's edge. There was a small dirt parking lot with room for maybe 5 or 6 cars. No one was there yet. I parked in the corner under a big oak tree and sat there for a few minutes finishing my coffee, watching the mist rise off the water. It looked beautiful, still and quiet, with small ripples spreading out from somewhere far off, probably a fish jumping. I grabbed my gear and walked down the worn path to the small wooden dock. The dock was old and creaked under my boots. I set up my rod, tied on a simple lure, and cast out into the water. I watched the line float and drift, the bobber rocking softly. It felt peaceful. I stood there for a long time, reeling in, casting out again, adjusting the line, looking at the patterns of the clouds moving overhead. It felt like hours went by. The sun was high now, and I was starting to sweat under my hat. I reeled in again and sat down on the dock to eat my sandwich. I sat with my feet dangling above the water, chewing slowly, looking at the trees along the shore on the other side. There was a narrow trail over there that led deeper into the woods. I had walked it once with a friend years ago, but I never went far. It wasn't an official trail, just a small path that hunters and hikers made over time. As I sat there eating, I saw something move along the trail, just at the edge of the trees. It was far away, but I could tell it was a person. They were walking slowly, stopping every few steps, like they were looking for something or inspecting the ground. I squinted but couldn't see any details, just that they wore dark clothes and a hat. After a while they moved out of sight into the trees. I finished my sandwich, crumpled the foil, and stuffed it in my pocket. I fished for another hour, but didn't catch anything. The sun was strong, and the water was starting to look oily under the heat. I packed up and walked back to my truck. I sat there with the AC on, drinking water, thinking about what to do with the rest of the day. I remembered that trail on the other side, and thought maybe I could go check it out for a bit. I had my boots on, a full bottle of water left, and a folding knife clipped to my pocket. It wasn't too hot yet, so I figured why not. I drove around to the other side of the lake, where there was a small clearing people used for camping. I parked there and walked down to where the trail began. It was narrow and overgrown. I had to push aside branches and step over fallen logs. The ground was dry and covered in dead leaves that cracked under my boots. After about 15 minutes of walking, the trail widened a bit and became easier. I walked slowly, listening to birds chirping and the wind rustling through the trees. I felt calm again, The kind of calm you only feel deep in the woods away from everything. At some point I came to a fork in the trail. One path led left and uphill, the other right and downhill toward what looked like a dried creek bed. I decided to go right, wanting to stay closer to the water in case it led somewhere interesting. The ground was sandy here, covered in small rocks. I could see animal tracks, deer mostly, and some that looked like coyote. I followed the creek bed for a while until I heard a noise ahead of me. I stopped and listened. It sounded like someone coughing. I stood there for a moment, waiting to hear it again. After a few seconds, I heard it, a rough, dry cough coming from around the bend of the creek. I felt uneasy. I wasn't expecting to run into anyone out here. I walked forward slowly, keeping my steps light so I wouldn't crunch the gravel under my boots. As I rounded the bend, I saw someone standing about 50 feet ahead, facing away from me. They were standing very still. I couldn't see their face, just their back. They wore a dark green jacket, black pants, and a brown hat pulled low. Something about how they stood bothered me. They didn't look like they were resting or looking at anything. They just stood there, completely still, with their arms hanging straight down. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling out, but something inside me told me not to. I took a step back, my boots scraping against a rock. The person flinched, like their shoulders tensed up for a second, but they didn't turn around. I froze. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then they lifted their arms slowly and pointed at something to their left, deep into the woods. They didn't say anything, didn't turn, just held their arm out and pointed. I followed their finger and saw nothing but trees and brush. I felt cold all over, even though it was hot outside. Something about it felt wrong. I took another step back. Their arm dropped back to their side. They didn't move after that. I turned and walked away quickly, trying not to run, but each step felt harder to control. When I reached the main trail again, I started jogging. I kept looking over my shoulder, but didn't see anyone behind me. I jogged all the way back to the clearing where my truck was parked. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat there breathing hard, sweat dripping down my neck. My hands were shaking. I didn't know why it scared me so much, but it did. I started the engine and drove back toward town. Halfway down the road, I pulled over and sat there with the engine running. I drank the rest of my water and tried to calm down. My heart was still racing. I kept thinking about how that person moved, how they didn't turn around, how they pointed so slowly. I tried to tell myself it was just some hiker messing around, maybe hunting and didn't want to talk, or maybe they were just confused. But deep down I felt like that wasn't it. Something about them felt wrong. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping again. When I got home, I put my gear away, took a long cold shower, and lay down on my bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me. My body felt heavy and tired, but my mind was awake, replaying the moment over and over. The way they flinched when I stepped back, the way they pointed. I lay there until the sun started going down and the room turned dark. That night I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them standing there. I got up and made tea, sat by the window, and watched the streetlights glowing outside. At around 3 a.m., I finally dozed off on the couch. When I woke up, it was morning again. Everything felt normal, like any other day. I went to work, came home, ate dinner. But the image stayed with me. A few days later, I looked up news about that area to see if anything strange happened there recently. There was nothing. No missing person reports, no crimes, nothing about hikers or hunters. I thought about going back to see if I could find them again, but every time I thought about it, I felt sick in my stomach. Weeks went by, then months. Eventually, the fear faded into a dull memory. But even now, sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night and my room is dark and quiet, I see them standing there in my mind, standing completely still with their back to me, lifting their arm and pointing into the trees. I still don't know what they wanted me to see, and I don't think I ever want to find out. I woke up around 5 in the morning. My eyes felt heavy and my body didn't want to move from the warmth of my blanket, but I forced myself to get up. My plan was simple. I wanted to drive out to the far side of the forest that bordered our town and hike in to reach the old fire lookout tower before sunrise. I had seen it so many times from a distance and always told myself I'd go up there one day, but I kept putting it off. That morning felt right. The air was cool, the skies were clear, and my mind felt heavy with too many thoughts, so I needed to clear it. I got dressed, pulled on my hiking boots, and grabbed a thermos of coffee I had made the night before. I stuffed some protein bars into my jacket pocket, zipped it up, and left quietly so I wouldn't wake my parents. I felt tired but excited, and as I stepped outside, the chill of the early morning air felt sharp on my skin. I took a deep breath, and it woke me up a bit more. I got in my car, an old Corolla that made clicking sounds when it turned over in the cold, and drove out through the quiet streets. There were no other cars on the road. The streetlights flickered past, and I felt that calm emptiness I only felt early in the morning when the world still slept. I drove for about 25 minutes down narrow roads lined with tall black trees until I reached the small gravel lot near the trailhead. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for a minute, sipping my coffee, feeling the heat go down my throat. The forest was pitch black in front of me. My headlights cut through a few thin tree trunks, but everything behind them was darkness. I grabbed my small backpack from the passenger seat, turned on my headlamp, and stepped out. My boots crunched on the gravel. I closed the car door softly, slung my backpack over one shoulder, and adjusted the straps. I started walking down the trail, following the tiny circle of white light my headlamp made in front of me. The air smelled like pine and wet soil. Every step made a small sound in the quiet. I could hear my breathing loud in my ears and the rustle of my jacket when I moved. I kept walking for about half an hour. The trail was narrow but well worn. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse of the tower light reflecting faintly off the trees ahead when I looked up. The sun hadn't started to rise yet, but the sky was fading from black to a very dark blue. Birds hadn't started singing, and the whole forest felt asleep. I stopped once to drink some coffee and catch my breath. The cold air burned a bit in my chest every time I inhaled deeply. As I stood there, I felt like someone was watching me. I turned my headlamp around and scanned the trees. There was nothing but dark tree trunks and scattered bushes. I shook off the feeling and kept going. After about another 20 minutes, I reached the base of the fire tower. It rose up in front of me, a tall black silhouette with metal stairs winding up around its legs. I walked to the base and looked up. My headlamp showed rust spots on the metal and old peeling paint on the railings. I put my hand on the railing and started climbing. The metal felt ice cold on my fingers. Each step clanged softly in the quiet morning. When I reached the top, I stepped onto the small platform and turned around. The forest stretched out in all directions, a dark, endless blanket of treetops. Far off, I could see the faint glow of the town waking up. I sat down, my back against the wooden wall of the small lookout cabin, and watched the sky slowly lighten. I sipped my coffee, which was still warm, and closed my eyes for a few minutes. I felt the wind move through my hair. My breathing calmed down. I felt peaceful. After about half an hour, the sun started coming up. Orange and pink streaks spread across the sky, and the forest below slowly came into view. I finished my coffee and packed everything back into my bag. I stood up, stretched my legs, and decided it was time to head back before my parents woke up and wondered where I was. I started walking down the stairs slowly, careful not to slip. When I reached the ground, I felt stiff and cold, so I walked quickly to warm myself up. The trail was brighter now, lit by the early morning sun coming through the trees at an angle. The air smelled fresh, and I felt calm. I walked for about 10 minutes, thinking about what I'd eat for breakfast when I got home. That's when I heard it. It was a thudding sound, like something heavy hitting the ground softly, not far behind me. I stopped walking and stood completely still. I turned my head slowly, scanning the trail behind me. Nothing. I turned my headlamp on again, even though there was enough light now to see. I shined it into the bushes on either side of the trail. Nothing moved. I shook my head, thinking maybe a branch had fallen somewhere. I started walking again, a little faster this time. After a few steps, I heard it again. Thud, thud, thud. Soft, heavy footsteps, keeping pace with me but slightly behind. I stopped walking again. The footsteps stopped. My heart started beating faster. I turned around and looked down the trail. Nothing. I waited for a minute, listening hard. The forest was silent except for some distant bird calls. I turned and kept walking, my breathing getting faster. I tried to calm myself down. I told myself it was probably a deer moving through the woods, or maybe a bear. That thought didn't make me feel any better. I kept walking, this time even faster, almost jogging. The footsteps started again, matching my speed, thudding softly on the ground. I could hear twigs snapping. My chest tightened. I stopped suddenly and turned around, trying to catch whatever it was off guard. The footsteps stopped instantly. The trail behind me was empty. The bushes didn't move. I felt sweat forming on my forehead, even though the air was cold. My breathing sounded loud in my ears. I scanned every bush and tree trunk. Nothing. I turned around and started walking again. This time I didn't care about being quiet. I moved as fast as I could without running. My boots crunched on the gravel and dry leaves. My backpack bounced on my shoulders. The footsteps started again. They were faster this time, matching me step for step. My chest felt tight, and my stomach turned cold. I broke into a run. My breathing turned harsh. I could hear the footsteps behind me, thudding heavier, faster, closer. I ran as hard as I could, my feet hitting the ground painfully with each step. The trees blurred past me. My headlamp bounced around with the motion, lighting up the ground in jerky flashes. I didn't look back. I just ran. I felt branches scratching my arms as I pushed through narrow parts of the trail. My legs burned, and my lungs felt like they were on fire, but I didn't slow down. After what felt like forever, I saw the edge of the forest ahead where the trail opened into the gravel lot. My car was there, parked in the pale morning light. I didn't stop running. I reached the car, fumbled with the keys in my pocket, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them. I bent down, grabbed them off the ground, unlocked the door, and jumped inside. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and sat there panting, my chest heaving, sweat dripping down the sides of my face. I looked out through the windshield, expecting to see something come out of the trees. Nothing. The forest stood silent, still. The morning sun lit up the tops of the trees, and everything looked normal, calm, peaceful. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, feeling my heart slow down. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. After about 10 minutes, I started the car and drove home. I kept checking the rearview mirror the whole way, half expecting to see something following me down the road, but there was nothing. When I reached home, I parked in the driveway and sat there for a minute before going inside. My legs felt weak as I climbed out. I went straight to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the table. My mom came in and asked me where I had been, but I just said I went for a morning hike. I didn't tell her anything about what happened. I didn't tell anyone. For the rest of the day, I kept thinking about it, about those footsteps matching mine, about whatever it was that followed me through the forest. I never went back to that tower again. For weeks after, every time I closed my eyes to sleep, I heard those footsteps in my head. I kept thinking about what could have happened if I had tripped and fallen while I ran, about what I would have seen if I had turned around at the last moment. I tried to forget it, but even now, whenever I walk alone in the woods, I always listen for footsteps behind me, waiting for that quiet thud, thud, thud to start again in the trees. I was a kid when this happened, probably around 8 or 9 years old. I think about it sometimes even now as an adult, because I can still see it so clearly in my mind, like a scene frozen in time that just sits there no matter how many years go by. Back then, life felt simple in ways that I didn't understand yet. School was my main focus, along with cartoons, playing outside until it got dark, and wondering what was for dinner every night. It's strange how your world is so small when you're that young. Everything that matters is just what's right in front of you. My great-grandmother had passed away not long before this happened. She wasn't someone I saw every day, but whenever I visited my grandparents' house where she lived, she was always there in her chair by the window. I didn't have deep talks with her or anything. I would just run in, say hi to my grandparents, and there she would be, sitting quietly in her chair with her hands folded in her lap or holding a cup of tea. Whenever she saw me, she'd smile and give me a thumbs up. Just that simple gesture. She never said much to me, but that thumbs up always felt warm. It made me giggle every time, like she was cheering me on for just existing, for just being there, and it made my chest feel lighter in a way I couldn't describe back then. After she passed, I remember feeling a weird emptiness about it. Not because I was deeply close to her, but because she was part of the house, part of that place that always felt safe and normal. Her chair by the window was empty every time I visited after that. No smile, no thumbs up, just the sunlight hitting the cushion she used to sit on. I think that's when I started to realize people actually disappear when they die. Before that, death felt like a movie thing. After her, it felt more real. One day, maybe a few weeks after she passed away, I was walking home from school like I always did. The sky was cloudy, just that dull gray that makes the air feel heavier, but it wasn't raining yet. I remember my backpack felt heavy that day because I had all my textbooks inside, since it was a Monday, and I had to bring everything back after the weekend. I was walking alone. My friends had all been picked up by their parents, but I usually walked. It wasn't far, just 10 minutes down a couple of quiet streets with hedges and big trees that dropped leaves all over the footpath. As I walked, I was thinking about my great-grandma for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe someone mentioned their grandma in class, or maybe I just thought of her because the air felt sad that day. I remembered her thumbs up. I pictured her smiling at me, wearing her brown sweater, and her thin white hair pulled back behind her ears. That image made me smile a little, and I remember looking down at my shoes and kicking a small rock along the footpath, pretending it was a soccer ball. I kept thinking about her thumbs up the whole walk home. When I reached my house, I felt a little burst of energy, like I always did after school. I wanted to get inside quickly, take off my heavy backpack, and run to the kitchen to see what snacks we had. As soon as I opened the front door, I called out for my mom, but she didn't answer. Maybe she was upstairs folding laundry, or maybe she was in the backyard watering the plants. I didn't think about it too much. I took off my shoes, dropped my bag in the entryway, and ran towards the basement stairs because my room was down there. Our house was split level, so when you entered, there was a small hallway, and then the stairs down to the basement were just ahead to the right. The basement wasn't creepy or anything. It was just carpeted with a small TV, some old couches, my room, and a big storage area my dad used for tools and random boxes. I was running down the stairs like I always did, skipping steps to go faster. About halfway down, my socks slipped on the carpeted stair edge. Everything happened so fast after that. I felt my foot shoot forward, and my knee hit the step below. The next second, my body was flying down the remaining steps. I remember feeling this sudden panic grip my chest so tight I couldn't breathe properly. I didn't even have time to shout. At the bottom of the stairs, there was this wooden baby gate installed to keep my little brother from climbing up or falling down the stairs. He was still a toddler then. The gate was sturdy, with metal brackets screwed into the wall. Right above the gate, the ceiling lowered a bit because of the way the split level was built. Tall people always had to duck when they stepped off the last stair, or they'd hit their head on the ceiling beam that jutted out slightly. When I was falling, everything felt like it was moving at double speed. My arms flailed out, trying to grab the handrail, but I missed it completely. I was just tumbling straight down towards the gate. I should have hit it hard. I should have crashed into it, cracked my ribs on the top rail, or smashed my face against it. Or if I had somehow flipped over it, I should have slammed my head into the ceiling beam right above it. I was falling in a way that felt like it was all wrong, like gravity was pulling me at a weird angle. But I didn't hit it. I didn't hit anything. Somehow, I landed softly on my feet and knees on the basement carpet right in front of the gate. My knees didn't even sting. My ankles didn't twist. My wrists didn't smack the floor. It was like I'd floated down the last few feet instead of falling. For a second, I just stayed there on my hands and knees, breathing fast, feeling my heart hammering so hard in my chest I thought it might burst. My palms were pressed against the soft brown carpet, and I remember seeing all the little bits of lint and old crumbs buried in the fibers. The basement smelled like dust and laundry detergent, that same smell it always had, but everything felt sharper and clearer than usual, like the colors around me were brighter somehow. My first thought, the very first thing that popped into my mind while I was still kneeling there shaking, was of my great-grandma. I could see her face so clearly in my head, smiling at me with her thin lips pulled up and her little thumbs-up gesture. That same thumbs-up she always gave me whenever I walked into my grandparents' house. For a second, it felt like she was there, not in a ghost way, not in some supernatural floating above me way, just there. Like the memory of her thumbs-up caught me before I hit the gate, like it paused me in midair and placed me gently down. I stayed on the carpet for another minute, just breathing and staring at the floor. I remember feeling tears in my eyes, not because I was hurt, but because I felt this rush of relief mixed with confusion. I was just a kid. I didn't think about physics or gravity or anything. All I knew was that I should have been hurt. I should have been crying from pain instead of relief. Eventually, I stood up slowly and tested my knees and ankles. Nothing hurt. I felt completely fine, just shaky and lightheaded from the adrenaline. I walked into my room, sat down on my bed, and just stared at my wall for a while. There were posters on my wall of my favorite cartoon characters, and a small shelf holding my books and a few Lego sets I'd built. Everything looked so normal, but I felt different inside. It was like the world had briefly shown me that it wasn't as solid and predictable as I thought it was. But I was a kid, so after sitting there for a while, I just turned on the TV and started watching cartoons like nothing happened. That night, when my dad got home from work, I wanted to tell him what happened. But when I started saying, "I fell down the stairs today, but I didn't get hurt," he just frowned and asked if I was okay. And when I said I was fine, he told me to be careful next time and went to change out of his work clothes. I didn't bother telling my mom either. I think I realized they wouldn't understand what I was really saying. It wasn't about falling down the stairs. It was about how I didn't fall the way I should have. But I didn't have the words for that back then. I went to bed that night thinking about my great-grandma. I pictured her sitting in her chair by the window, looking out at the garden and sipping her tea. I could see her turning her head towards me with that soft smile and giving me a thumbs up. I fell asleep with that image in my mind. It felt warm, like a blanket around my chest. Years went by after that. I grew up, went to high school, then college, then started working. Life became busy and stressful in ways I never imagined when I was 8. But even now, every time I see stairs like that, carpeted stairs leading down to a low-ceiling basement, I feel a flicker of that memory. I can still see the whole thing perfectly clear in my mind, the slipping, the tumbling, the rush of air against my face, the carpet rushing towards me, and then just landing softly, like something or someone caught me. I've told myself so many times as an adult that it was just my imagination. Maybe I didn't fall as hard as I remember. Maybe I was just lucky that day and landed in a way that didn't hurt me. That's probably the truth. I know that. There's no magic in this world. People die and they're gone. Gravity always pulls you down, no matter who you are. But still, whenever I think about it, I see her thumbs up in my mind, just like I did that day. Just that simple, small smile and her thumb lifted gently in my direction, like she was saying, "You're okay. Keep going." And somehow, even if it was all in my head, that makes the memory feel good instead of scary. Because life kept going after that, with its own new accidents and losses and worries. But every time I think of that fall, I remember that even when I felt like I was crashing, I landed softly. I guess that's all I really needed to know back then, and maybe that's still all I need to know now. I had always loved riding my bike alone at night. It was one of the only times I could clear my mind and feel free. I lived in a small town that was surrounded by long country roads, wheat fields, and old farmhouses with fences that were falling apart. Every night after dinner, I would go out for a ride, just to let the cool air brush against my face and feel like there was nothing to worry about. It was my routine. My parents didn't care much. They just told me not to stay out too late. That evening, I finished dinner and felt heavy from the day. Work had been rough. I was tired, but I wanted that ride, that feeling of breathing out all the heaviness. So I grabbed my bike, checked my phone's battery, and left. The sky was already dark, no colors left on the horizon, only some stars flickering up there. I decided I'd take the longest route tonight, the one that goes past the old granary and then loops back into town through the service road. It was about 15 miles altogether. Long enough to feel like I'd done something with my evening before sleeping. The roads were silent, only my tires on the asphalt and the rhythmic clicking of my chain. I passed by the empty fields, seeing nothing but shadows of tall grass swaying back and forth with the breeze. I loved that sound, the constant soft brushing of grass on grass. It felt peaceful. I kept pedaling, looking down at my front light beam that cut into the darkness, showing the gravel and cracks in the road. I had reached about 6 miles out when I felt something strange. My light caught a glimpse of something ahead on the side of the road. At first I thought it was just trash, maybe a bag someone threw out of a car window. But as I got closer, I saw it was a backpack. A large, dark blue hiking backpack lying half in the grass, half on the edge of the road. It looked like someone had just dropped it there. I slowed down and stopped, balancing myself with one foot on the ground. I looked around. There was nothing but open fields to my left, and a small cluster of trees and bushes far to my right. No cars, no people. The backpack looked new. I thought maybe someone had been walking and dropped it from their car or truck, but it seemed too heavy to just fall out unnoticed. I looked at it for a while, deciding if I should check it or just leave. My curiosity got the better of me. I leaned my bike against a metal signpost and walked over. As I got closer, I saw there was dirt all over it, like it had been dragged. I crouched down and reached for the zipper. I hesitated. I felt my heart thumping. I didn't know why I was feeling scared. It was just a backpack, but the way it was sitting there in the dark made me uneasy. I took a breath and unzipped the top pocket. Inside were a few granola bars, a crushed plastic bottle, and some tissues. Nothing scary. I checked the next zipper. A folded flannel shirt, a small towel, and an empty wallet with no cash or cards, only a folded receipt for gas from 2 days ago. I checked the name printed on the receipt. It said Dylan Marks. I didn't recognize the name, but it felt real and normal, like any stranger's receipt would. I zipped it back up and stood up. That's when I heard something from across the road, in the field. It was faint, but I heard it again, like a low groan. I turned quickly, scanning with my bike light. The beam only reached a few feet into the tall grass. I stepped towards it and heard another sound, this time like someone coughing softly. My stomach clenched. I wanted to get on my bike and ride away, but something in me couldn't leave it. I moved closer to the sound, stepping off the road into the grass. The blades brushed against my shins, and I felt the cold moisture soaking my socks. I walked about 10 feet in, shining my light all around. That's when I saw him. A man was lying on his side, curled up slightly, wearing jeans and a thick jacket. His backpack must have been his. He wasn't moving much, just trembling a bit. I moved closer and saw his eyes were open. They were glazed over, staring blankly ahead. His lips were pale, and there was a small trickle of blood running from his nose down to his upper lip. I froze. I didn't know what to do. He was breathing, but very shallow. I looked down at his hands. They were scraped and covered in dirt, and his knuckles were swollen like he had been punching something hard over and over. I wanted to say something, but my throat felt tight. I checked my phone for signal. 1 bar, barely enough. I called emergency services and told them exactly where I was, describing the man, and that he was breathing but not responding to me. They told me to stay on the line and wait there. The woman's voice felt distant in my ear as I crouched down again, shining the light over his body to see if he was bleeding anywhere else. His jeans were torn at the knees, and there were deep scratches on his calves. He looked like he had been running through brambles or crawling away from something. His jacket was zipped all the way up, but it was filthy, covered in mud and grass stains. I stayed crouched there, feeling my legs start to ache. The operator kept asking me questions about him, but I barely answered. I was too focused on the way his eyes kept moving slightly, darting back and forth, even though he wasn't really looking at me. After what felt like forever, I saw headlights coming up the road. It was a patrol car. 2 officers got out and walked towards me, shining their flashlights into the field. I stood up and backed away as they rushed over to the man. I heard one of them call in for an ambulance, using clipped fast words into his radio. The other officer was asking me what happened. I told him everything, how I found the backpack, and then him. He was scribbling notes onto a pad as the ambulance arrived. The paramedics moved quickly, checking his vitals and putting an oxygen mask over his face. I watched them lift him onto the stretcher and wheel him back towards the road. His body looked so limp and thin under the straps. The officers kept me there for a while, asking if I saw anyone else or any cars parked nearby. I kept shaking my head. They took my name and phone number before letting me go. I walked back to my bike, feeling like my legs weren't working right. My knees felt soft, and my stomach was tight with nausea. I got on and started riding back home, pedaling hard. I didn't care about the sweat dripping down my back or the cold air burning my throat. I just wanted to be back in my room, in my bed, away from the cold fields and the silent road. When I reached town, the streets were empty. The orange streetlights flickered here and there. I parked my bike in the garage and walked inside. My parents were already asleep. I went straight to my room and locked the door. I sat on the floor for a long time, leaning against my bed, staring at my hands that were still shaking. I couldn't stop thinking about his eyes. The way they moved like he was trying to find something in the darkness. I wondered what had happened to him. Was he attacked? Did he get lost running from someone? Why did his backpack end up on the road while he lay in the grass, broken and half dead? The next morning, I called the local sheriff's office to ask if he was okay. They said he was in the hospital and alive, but they wouldn't tell me anything else. For days, I couldn't focus at work. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him lying there with his chest barely moving and his fingers twitching against the grass. I stopped going for rides at night. I couldn't handle being out there alone anymore, thinking about all the dark fields stretching out on both sides of the road, thinking about who else might be out there, lying in the grass unseen, or who might be watching me ride by with nothing but a thin beam of light between me and the darkness. Weeks passed and I tried to forget it. But even now, when I ride during the day, I keep glancing into the fields, expecting to see someone staring back at me or see another backpack left behind like a marker, waiting for someone like me to find it. I don't know why he was out there or what he was running from, but every time I think about his eyes, I feel that same cold grip inside my chest, the feeling that he wasn't just lost. He was escaping something, and he almost didn't make it. I still ride my bike sometimes, but only around the block or to the corner store. I avoid the country roads now. I avoid the empty places where all you can hear is the wind in the grass and your own heart beating in your ears. Because I know that once you step off the road and into the dark fields, there's no telling what you'll find, or what might find you first. I had been living in my first apartment alone for maybe 2 weeks. It was my first time really being on my own. No roommates, no family down the hall, no dog barking in the next room. Just me in a little basement apartment. It was cheap, that's why I got it. The windows were at ground level, which always felt weird to me because when people walked by outside, you didn't see their faces. You saw legs and shoes. That's it. Just shoes walking past your window while you sat on your couch, eating dinner or scrolling your phone, pretending you didn't feel like a mole person underground. The apartment had 2 bedrooms. I used the smaller one to sleep in. The other was empty, filled with some spare boxes from moving in. I hadn't unpacked everything yet because I was working long hours. That second room had a window with water damage under it, so the blinds were pulled all the way up to let it dry out before maintenance could come fix it. Every day after work, I'd come home, drop my bag on the kitchen counter, heat up something quick like instant noodles or leftover pasta, and sit on my old couch to eat in silence. I would hear people's shoes walking by as I chewed. It always made me feel uneasy. Not because I thought someone would break in, but because I realized how alone I was down there, separated from the world above by just a few feet of concrete and earth. That night had been normal. I stayed up watching videos on my phone until my eyes felt heavy, then plugged it into the charger beside my mattress on the floor. I hadn't even gotten a bed frame yet. The room was small, with a plain dresser against the wall, a basket of laundry half folded in the corner, and my blackout blinds drawn tightly shut. I remember feeling tired, that deep exhaustion that wraps around you and makes your bones feel heavy. I fell asleep easily. At some point in the night, I woke up, but it wasn't the slow, hazy wake up when you're half dreaming. It was instant, like someone had snapped their fingers inside my brain and every nerve was suddenly awake. My chest felt tight. My breathing was quiet and shallow. It was like my body knew something was wrong before my mind did. I didn't move at first. I just lay there in the darkness, listening. My ears strained for any sound outside of my own breathing. I reached for my phone and checked the time. Around 4 in the morning. The numbers glowed harsh and blue in the darkness. I lay there, trying to calm my racing heart, telling myself it was just the anxiety of being alone, that there was no noise, no reason to panic. But then I turned slightly in bed, facing the window. That's when I saw it. A large dark shadow of a person outside. They had a flashlight. The light was moving around, searching. I felt a wave of panic, so strong it almost made me sick. The person was right outside my window, scanning it with the flashlight like they were checking to see if anyone was awake. I froze. My body felt cold all over. My hands were shaking so badly I could feel my teeth vibrating against each other. My mind was screaming to do something, anything. I reached slowly under my pillow and grabbed the small hunting knife I kept there. It was more for feeling safe than actually thinking I could defend myself with it. But at that moment, it felt like the only thing between me and death. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, every movement deliberate and silent. My knees felt weak, like they would give out under me, but I forced myself to stand. I held the knife tight in my hand, feeling the cold metal handle dig into my palm. I moved to the bedroom door, slipped into the hallway, and crept towards the empty spare room. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whoever was outside would hear it. I peeked around the corner into the empty bedroom. The blinds were still pulled up, and I could see the flashlight beam scanning the floor inside. The person was big. I could see their heavy boots outside, the way they shifted their weight from foot to foot as they moved the light across the boxes on the floor. They had keys on their belt that jingled softly when they moved. Every part of me was screaming that this was it. I was alone. No neighbors close enough to hear if I screamed. No one to call for help fast enough. I felt tears start to sting my eyes, but I blinked them away. I told myself I had to stay calm, had to keep my head clear. I gripped the knife tighter, ready to do whatever I had to do. I pictured lunging at them if they smashed the window or came through the door, but deep down I knew I probably wouldn't stand a chance. As I stood there, shaking and staring at the silhouette of the person outside my window, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The vibration made me jump so hard I almost dropped the knife. I fumbled to pull it out with my free hand and saw I had a text from my friend who worked on the local police force. All it said was, "What's going on at your apartment?" I felt my chest tighten even more. My first thought was that they were somehow watching me, that maybe the person outside had sent them a message. My brain wasn't making sense. Panic was fogging every logical thought. I texted back quickly, telling them there was someone outside my window with a flashlight. My fingers were trembling so badly I could barely type. I waited for what felt like forever, but didn't get an answer back. Outside, the person with the flashlight paused, then slowly turned and walked away. I stood there, frozen, my knees locked, unable to move. I felt like if I moved, they would come back. I waited in the silent darkness for what felt like hours, but it was probably only a minute or two. Then, I went back to my bedroom and sat down on my bed, knife still in my hand. My body felt drained, but adrenaline was still making me shake. I sat there in the darkness, staring at the closed blinds, listening for any sound. Not 5 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. It wasn't just a regular knock. It was loud and forceful, the kind of knock that rattles the thin wood of a cheap apartment door. My stomach dropped. I thought, this is it. This is them coming to finish it. My mouth went dry. I felt a cold sweat spread across my neck and back. I sat frozen, staring at the door. I didn't have a peephole. No safety chain. Just a flimsy deadbolt between me and whoever was on the other side. I forced myself to stand up. My legs felt numb, like I'd been sitting for days. I held the knife tight and walked to the door. I took a deep breath to steady my shaking voice and yelled out as loud as I could, hoping my neighbors upstairs would hear me. "Who is it?" There was silence for a moment. Then I heard a voice reply, quiet and almost hesitant, saying it was the police. For a second, my fear didn't lessen. In fact, it got worse. My mind started spinning with the possibility that whoever was outside was pretending to be the police to get me to open the door. I gripped the doorknob, feeling it cold and smooth under my sweaty palm. I stood there, trying to decide what to do. Then the voice said again that I wasn't in trouble, they just needed to talk to me. My hand was shaking so badly that the metal of the knife was clinking against the door as I held it. I took a deep breath and opened the door just a crack, ready to slam it shut if I needed to. Outside were 2 uniformed police officers. One was standing close to the door, his hands up slightly, like he was trying to show me he wasn't a threat. The other stood back on the steps leading up to ground level. They both looked tense, and I realized they must have seen the knife in my hand. I let out a sob without meaning to. The adrenaline broke, and everything came out at once. My body started shaking uncontrollably. Tears were streaming down my face. I lowered the knife slowly and just stood there, trying to catch my breath. The officers explained that they were the ones outside my window. They apologized for scaring me. I didn't even have words. I just stood there, crying and shaking, feeling a wave of relief so strong it almost knocked me over. They explained that there had been a call about a break-in in one of the other units. A resident had gotten drunk, lost his keys, and broken into his own apartment by mistake. When they arrived, they saw my windows and were checking around to make sure no one else was involved. They said my police friend had called it in when he heard about the address. I nodded along, not really taking it in, just wanting them to leave so I could collapse onto my bed and bury myself under the blankets. After they left, I closed the door, locked it, and slid down onto the floor, pressing my forehead against my knees. I sat there for a long time, listening to the sound of my own ragged breathing in the silent apartment. My hands were still shaking. Eventually, I crawled into bed, still fully dressed, and lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadow of that person with the flashlight scanning my floor. The next day, my police friend called me to check if I was okay. He explained the whole story again. The drunk resident, the confusion, the officers checking the windows to make sure no one else had broken in. I laughed a little when he told me, but it was a weak laugh, hollow and tired. That night had changed something in me. I never felt fully safe in that apartment again. Every sound outside my window made my heart jump into my throat. Every shadow felt like someone coming to hurt me. Eventually, I moved out. Found a place on the 3rd floor of a building with a balcony instead of ground-level windows. I still think about that night sometimes, how it felt to stand in the darkness of my hallway, gripping a tiny knife, thinking that my life was about to end. I remember the adrenaline, the shaking, the fear so deep it felt like my bones were vibrating with it. It's a funny story now, in a way, when I tell friends about it, but I never tell them the whole thing. I never tell them how truly terrified I was. How, in those moments, I realized how alone I really was. How easily someone could have come in, and there would have been no one to stop them. That feeling stayed with me for a long time after. Even now, years later, in a better apartment, with better locks and a dog that barks at every noise, sometimes I wake up at 4 in the morning with my heart pounding, certain that I was so tired that night. My legs felt heavy every time I took a step, like I'd been carrying bags of cement around all day, which honestly wasn't far from the truth. I'd been up since dawn helping my mother and aunt cook Easter dinner for the whole family, plus taking care of my grandmother, who needed me for everything these days. She had her stroke a few months back, and it was bad. It left her whole left side paralyzed. She couldn't speak properly anymore. Sometimes she'd mumble or let out little moans, but mostly she communicated by moving her right hand or making sounds like yes or no. I was her caretaker because my mother worked too much and my aunt lived far away. I had dropped out of college for now to help her, and I didn't really regret it. She'd raised me when my dad walked out, and my mom was working 2 jobs. She was my nana. She deserved everything I could give her. But that night, I was running on fumes. My eyes kept trying to close on their own. My mother and aunt had thrown the dinner at our house. It was the first time we'd hosted Easter since her stroke. Everyone left in the evening, but neither of them bothered to clean up before they went out again to see their friends. I didn't blame them. They needed breaks too. But when it was just me and Nana left in that quiet, messy house, it felt heavy. Heavy in a way I can't really explain. Like I had weights on my chest instead of just in my legs. I put Nana to bed around 10 p.m. Her room was small and warm, with an old floral comforter and a little lamp by her bedside. I brushed her hair gently, humming some old songs she used to sing when I was a kid, and wiped her face with a warm cloth. She smiled at me that night, just a tiny little pull at the corner of her mouth, but it was there. That smile meant everything to me because lately, she'd been having these awful episodes before sleep. It had started about a week earlier. We'd tuck her in, kiss her forehead, say goodnight, turn off the lamp, and walk out. Then a few minutes later, she'd start screaming. I'd run in and she'd be sobbing so hard her chest heaved, grabbing fistfuls of her hair with her good hand, pulling at it in terror. I'd try to calm her down, stroke her arm, hold her hand, shush her softly, but it was like she wasn't even there. Her eyes would be wide open, fixed on something in the back upper corner of her room, near where the walls met the ceiling. One night I asked her yes or no questions, slow and careful, so she could nod or shake her head with what little neck movement she had left. Was there something there? Nod. Was it a person? Shake. An animal? Shake. Something else? Nod. I asked if it reminded her of something, and she reached towards her dresser, where there was a framed photo of her parents. Then she kissed the crucifix necklace she never took off now. That scared me because Nana was never religious. Never. I asked her if it had a face, and she moved her mouth wide open in an unnatural way, showing her teeth, her eyes tearing up with terror. I stopped asking after that. There was nothing I could do for her but hold her hand until she fell asleep crying. But that night she didn't scream. She went to sleep so peacefully it made my chest ache with relief. I tucked her in, turned off the lamp, whispered goodnight, and closed her door softly behind me. It was about midnight by then. The house felt still. So still it felt wrong. But I was too tired to care. I went back into the kitchen and looked around at the disaster. There were casserole dishes crusted with dried cheese, pans with bits of ham fat stuck on them, plates with hardened gravy streaks, mugs half filled with cold coffee, glasses with dried rings of juice. The table was buried under used napkins, empty plastic packaging from the ham, crumbs everywhere, and piles of towels my aunt had folded but hadn't put away. It was just overwhelming. I sighed, rubbed my eyes hard, and started picking up the towels to take them into the kitchen drawers where we kept them. As I was walking across the living room, balancing that stack of towels against my chest, I heard voices. Men's voices, clear as if two men were having a conversation just a room away. My heart jumped into my throat so fast it felt like I couldn't swallow. I thought maybe I'd accidentally turned on the TV with the remote I had just put away. Sometimes I'd hit it with my elbow without realizing. The TV was in the far room on the other side of the kitchen. That room was deadbolt because we never used it anymore, but the TV was still in there. I put down the towels and grabbed the remote from the shelf where I'd set it earlier, aiming it at the doorway to that room and pressing power. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, harder this time. Nothing. The voices kept going, like murmuring conversation, but I couldn't make out the words. I took a few slow steps towards the kitchen, thinking maybe the sound was coming from there. My chest felt tight, like I was trying to breathe through a straw. I walked past the bathroom door, built off the kitchen in this old weird layout the house had. As I passed it, I got this sudden prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I used to get that as a kid all the time, that feeling that someone was staring at me or standing just behind me. I shook it off, told myself I was overtired, and focused on the sound. The voices faded out, and it sounded like water running through the pipes. Relief washed over me so fast my knees felt weak. It's just water, I told myself. Just old house noises. I picked up the towels again and went to put them away. When I came back, I froze. There were papers on the living room floor. I stared at them for a good 5 seconds, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Those papers had been on the table when I walked by just now. Neatly stacked bills and letters, right on top of the junk mail pile my mother never sorted. Now they were scattered on the carpet, like someone had picked them up and thrown them down deliberately. My throat felt dry. I bent down slowly, gathered them up with shaking hands, and placed them back on the table exactly how they'd been. Just tired, I told myself. You're so tired you probably bumped the table and didn't notice. I went back to the kitchen to start on the dishes. I passed by the bathroom again, my eyes on the floor, so I wouldn't see my reflection in the mirror, because suddenly I was scared of mirrors. I don't know why. Maybe it was that prickly feeling still crawling over my skin. But then, in the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I turned my head before I could stop myself, and there he was, a small man wearing a dark hat, dancing slowly in the middle of the bathroom floor, just spinning in slow circles, arms raised slightly, feet moving side to side in a rhythm I couldn't hear. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. I blinked hard, once, twice, and he was gone. I stood there shaking. My knees felt like they were going to give out under me. I gripped the edge of the counter, so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to run. Everything in my body screamed at me to run. But then I looked at the dishes piled high in the sink, and this insane thought crossed my mind. They need to be done. The thought was so normal it calmed me down for a second. I told myself, out loud, just to hear my own voice, you're tired. You're seeing things. Just wash the dishes and go to bed. So I shut the bathroom door softly, like I was afraid to wake someone up, and turned back to the kitchen sink. As I reached down to pick up a dirty casserole dish, I saw the TV cable lying on the kitchen floor. My stomach dropped. That cable had been in the deadbolt room with the TV. It was right there in the middle of the floor, coiled like a snake waiting for me to notice. My hand started shaking so bad, I almost dropped the dish. I bent down, picked it up, and set it on the table without thinking. I didn't even want to know how it got there. I turned back to the sink, ran the hot water, and started scrubbing. I scrubbed so hard my fingertips turned red and wrinkly. I hummed under my breath, some dumb pop song I'd heard on the radio earlier that day, just to prove I wasn't scared. I scrubbed that dish like it was the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. I was halfway through the casserole dish when I heard it. 3 quick, loud knocks coming from underneath the sink. Knock, knock, knock. My heart jumped so hard I felt dizzy. It sounded like someone was crouched down in the cabinet under the sink, knocking up against the metal from inside with their knuckles. My brain tried to rationalize. Maybe the dish caused an echo. So I picked it up and dropped it lightly in the sink. Silence. I dropped it again, harder this time. Silence. I paused, holding my breath, my ears ringing with how hard my heart was pounding. Nothing. No knocks. I swallowed, my throat so tight it felt like it might close up. I went back to scrubbing, but I was quieter now. I didn't hum. I didn't want to hear my own voice tremble. Then, as I was rinsing the dish, the cabinet door under the sink swung open slowly, deliberately, and hit my knee. Not hard, just a little tap. It paused, then swung back and hit my knee again, the exact same way. Tap. Pause. Tap. My vision blurred with tears of pure terror. I dropped the dish right there in the sink, letting it clatter and splash water everywhere, and backed away so fast I almost fell over my own feet. I didn't even turn off the water. I walked backwards into the living room, not taking my eyes off that kitchen doorway, repeating the Lord's Prayer under my breath over and over and over again. I hadn't said it since I was a kid, but the words came back like they'd never left. The prickly feeling on my skin grew stronger, almost burning, and then all at once it lifted, like a weight thrown off my shoulders. The house felt normal again, still and quiet, but normal. I stood there in the dark living room for a long time, my hands shaking so bad I couldn't unclench my fists. I thought about Nana, lying in her bed on the far side of the room. I didn't want that thing, whatever it was, anywhere near her. I didn't know what it was. I didn't want to know. I didn't believe in ghosts. I still don't, not really. But this happened just a few years ago, back when I was still engaged in a trade many would frown on. I don't feel proud saying it, but I don't feel shame either. I was a young and desperate man, living alone in a city that never cared who you were unless you had money. I had none. What I did have was a good body, strong arms from years of working in construction before layoffs sent me out, broad shoulders, a chest that looked good oiled, and a tall frame that made people notice me. So when things got bad, I started using what I had left to keep the lights on and the fridge full. People talk like they'd never do it, but hunger has a way of stripping away dignity, like a hose stripping paint off a wall. I didn't hate what I did. In fact, some days it felt like I was in control for the first time. I chose my clients. I set my prices. I could say no anytime. Most of my clients were fine, lonely old men or men with wives who didn't know how to touch them the way they wanted. Some just needed company. Some needed to be hurt a little. I was always polite, always smiling, always gentle even when they didn't ask for it. I think that's what kept me safe. That and my size. If anything went wrong, I could hold my own. I never told my family. They wouldn't understand. I was always the good son. But they didn't have to pay my rent, so their opinions meant nothing. I was careful. I screened people. I avoided drugs. I avoided pimps. I worked independently and didn't go out drinking with other workers. The street was no place for friendships anyway. But I had a friend who passed clients my way if they were safe and well-paying. I trusted him. He never sent me to dangerous people before. This client was different from the start. My friend called him a distinguished gentleman, and that was what he was. The first time I saw him, he was wearing a dark gray suit with thin black stripes, polished leather shoes, a gold watch that peeked out from under his crisp sleeve. His hair was brushed back, neat, with streaks of white at the temples. His face was sharp and pale, but his eyes were soft brown, almost sad-looking. I remember thinking he looked more like a professor than someone who hired people like me. He spoke very little when I arrived at his home. It was an old house, 3 stories, brick walls, small front yard with stone lions flanking the walkway. Inside was even older, deep red carpets, dark wooden furniture, brass lamps with soft yellow light. It smelled like old books and lavender. I saw shelves lined with books, framed paintings of landscapes and old portraits, and heavy curtains over tall windows. He offered me juice. I took it. I was hungry and tired, and his house felt safe. Stupid, I know. We sat in his living room, and he told me about what he wanted in general terms. He said he just wanted a massage with some light play after. That wasn't unusual. Some men wanted pain. Some wanted me to call them names. Some wanted to be called daddy. He didn't say anything specific. Just light play. I nodded, and he smiled a little. He had a calm way about him that made it easy to let my guard down. I finished my juice while he told me about how stressful his work was and how he needed release. I just kept nodding, pretending to listen, the way I always did. My stomach felt warm, heavier than normal, but but I blamed the long day and the juice filling me up too fast. When he led me up the carpeted stairs to his bedroom, I noticed the plastic sheets. They were spread over his bed and tucked beneath, with another layer under the bed frame covering part of the floor. Usually plastic sheets meant one thing, golden showers, but there was no jug of water or beer waiting for me to drink before the session. It crossed my mind he was just tidy and didn't want oil or lotion staining his expensive bed. I thought nothing of it and took off my shirt while he undressed, folding his clothes neatly over a chair. That's when I noticed the scars. So many of them. Pale lines crisscrossing his chest, some old and thin, some thicker and darker like burns. His upper arms had them too, and his back looked almost like a topographic map, raised ridges and dips under his pale skin. I paused only for a second, not wanting to stare. I'd seen men with self-inflicted scars before, but these didn't look like cuts from razors. They were deeper, wider, some healed unevenly. I wondered if he had been in an accident, or if someone else had done that to him. The sight made my stomach clench tighter than before. I oiled my hands and started the massage. His body was stiff and cold at first, but as I worked into his shoulders and back, he softened. The room was quiet except for his soft breathing and the rain outside tapping against the window. An hour passed. My arms ached from the constant pressure, but I kept going, working my way down his back, his legs, his feet. When I got to his neck again and bent down to lick at his collarbone while stroking him, like most clients liked, he reached out to the table by the bed. He opened a large dark wood box. Inside were small, shiny blades laid out neatly on black velvet. There were scalpels, tiny scissors, curved knives, and thin metal rods. I felt my chest tighten. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. I understood. I wanted to pull away. My instinct screamed at me to leave. But when I tried to stand, my legs felt heavy, like my muscles had lost half their strength. My hands trembled. The juice. Something was in it. Not to knock me out completely, but enough to soften my will, to dull my fear, to slow my thoughts. He picked up a scalpel, tracing it down his chest. He guided my hand to take it. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, loud like thunder. My mouth was dry. He looked at me, his eyes almost pleading. I don't know if it was the drugs or the dim candlelight flickering around us, or just the way he looked so desperate, but I felt a different kind of heat spread through me. Something I didn't know I had in me. Something dark. He told me without words what he wanted. I pressed the blade against his chest and watched a thin red line bloom across his skin. His breath hitched and his eyes fluttered closed. I cut again, deeper this time. The blood welled up, thick and dark, running down his sides onto the plastic sheets. He gasped and arched his back, his face twisted in pain and pleasure. My hand shook, but not with fear anymore. It was something else. Something I didn't want to admit to myself. I don't know how long it went on. He bled, I cut. He moaned softly with each slice. My hands were slippery with his blood, the blade sticky with it. The smell was metallic and strong. At some point, I felt like I wasn't alone. Like there were eyes watching from the dark corners of the room, from behind the curtains, from under the bed. It made me harder, made my chest tighten with something close to panic, but also excitement. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but saw no one. Just shadows dancing on the walls. But the feeling only grew stronger as the candles burned lower. When it was over, he cleaned himself with a towel, pressing it to his wounds as I sat there, dizzy and shaking, staring at my hands. He gave me an envelope thick with money, more than I'd ever been paid before. My arms were covered in smears of his blood. He kissed my forehead before I left, like I was his child, and thanked me softly. I stumbled out of the house into the dark street, the rain cold on my skin, washing away the blood but not the smell. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the cuts in my mind replay over and over. Part of me was terrified. Another part of me felt a deep ache of desire. That was what scared me the most. I told myself I would never see him again. A month passed. Then two. I tried to push that night out of my head. But sometimes when I closed my eyes, I saw his pale body under mine, bleeding for me. And I felt sick. And I felt hard. Both at the same time. 3 months later, my friend contacted me again. He said the gentleman was asking for me. He said it would be all expenses paid, double my rate, just to come spend an evening with him. I said no. My friend pressed, telling me the man would even come to my city to see me, that he was desperate for me, that he wanted only me. Every time I refused, my chest felt tight, like I was suffocating. The money was enough to pay rent for months. Enough to buy food, clothes, everything I needed. But every time I thought about seeing him again, I felt something black and sticky coil inside my chest. A part of me wanted to say yes, to feel that rush again, to watch his blood drip onto my hands, to feel powerful in that sick way. Another part of me knew if I went back, I would never come back the same. In the end, I blocked my friend's number. I packed my things and moved to another city far away. I left no forwarding address. I changed my phone. I started doing warehouse work, stacking boxes, sweeping floors. The pay was shit, but it was honest. Some nights when I lie in bed, exhausted from lifting crates all day, I can still smell blood under my nails. I scrub them raw in the shower, but the smell never leaves. I don't know what became of him. I never saw his name in the news. I never heard of him dying. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, waiting, his pale, scarred chest rising and falling in the candlelight, dreaming of the man who cut him and made him feel alive. Sometimes I dream of him too, and I wake up with my sheets soaked with sweat, my hands clenched so tight the nails cut into my palms. In those moments, I hate myself more than I ever did for selling my body, because there's a part of me that wants to go back, that wants to taste that feeling again, and that part is why I will never, ever go back, because I know if I do, I might not ever leave that house again, and that is the truth of it, every word. I wish it didn't happen, but it did. I've been called many things in my life. Whore, slut, sinner, worthless. Liar is one of the least hurtful. But this story is real. Take it as you will. I live with it every single day. I had always known my gran to be someone who walked fast and thought faster. Even when she was older, she moved like her legs remembered the rhythm of busy market streets and the weight of shopping bags on her arms. But back then, she was still young. Mom told me this story when I was a kid, and she always told it the same way, with a kind of seriousness that made the room feel quiet for a few minutes afterwards. My gran had gone into town that morning like she usually did once a week. She had her list written out on a folded piece of paper, with little ticks next to the things she bought as she went along. Mom said Gran always started at the small grocery shop on the corner, the one that had big wooden crates out front with vegetables in them. Back then, all the potatoes still had dirt on them, and carrots came in thick bunches tied with twine. Gran picked through them carefully, always looking for ones that would last the week. She put them into her canvas bag one by one, brushing the dirt from her hands onto her skirt before moving on to the next thing on her list. After that, she went into the butcher's shop. It was narrow and always smelled of sawdust and raw meat. She had to stand close to the glass counter so the people behind her could squeeze in the doorway. She picked out some thick sausages, a small leg of lamb, and some rashers of bacon. The butcher wrapped everything in wax paper and tied it with thin brown string. Gran tucked it into her bag carefully so it wouldn't squash the bread rolls she had bought earlier from the bakery across the road. She paid with a few folded pound notes from her purse and stepped back out into the cold morning air. She stopped next at the post office to pay a bill and posted a letter she had written to her sister. She had written it late the night before after everyone went to bed. Gran always sat at the kitchen table to write letters, leaning close to the page, squinting at her words in the small circle of light from the lamp. She folded the letter neatly and sealed it with a quick press of her thumb over the flap before tucking it into her handbag ready for the next morning. When she posted it, she said she remembered feeling relieved that she had remembered to write. She hated the feeling of unfinished things. After the post office, she walked past the church. The tall wooden doors were shut, but the smell of old stone and candle wax drifted out of the cracks. Gran always walked a little faster past the church. She said it reminded her of funerals, and funerals made her think of her own parents, which made her feel sad for the rest of the day. Once she finished all her errands, she started walking back home. It was a good 20-minute walk, past rows of small brick houses, a few empty lots with overgrown grass, and an old playground with rusted swings. On her way home, she passed by Mrs. Black's house. Mrs. Black was someone she had known for years. Their houses were only a few doors away from each other. They used to see each other nearly every day, whether it was while hanging washing on the line, or putting out rubbish bins, or checking the mail. That day, Mrs. Black was out in her front garden. She was bending over slightly, her back curved as she reached into the flower bed to pull up weeds. Her hair was tied back in a small bun, and she was wearing a pale blue cardigan over a dress with tiny flowers printed on it. Gran slowed down as she walked past. She raised a hand in greeting, and Mrs. Black straightened up. She brushed her hands against her knees to get rid of the dirt, stood with her back straight for a moment, and looked towards Gran. Gran paused near the small brick wall that edged the garden. She watched Mrs. Black glance towards the flowers and then back towards her again. Gran stood there for a little while, just watching her neighbor tidy up her garden. She noticed how the sun hit the white tips of the daisies growing along the fence. She noticed the smell of damp earth where Mrs. Black had turned up the soil. She noticed how a light breeze moved the fabric of Mrs. Black's cardigan, making it flutter slightly at the edges. It was a calm scene, and for some reason, it made Gran feel peaceful. She lifted her bag a little higher on her shoulder and turned to continue walking home. When she got inside, she kicked off her shoes near the door. The hallway smelled faintly of the lavender polish she used on the wooden floors every Saturday morning. She carried her bags into the kitchen, placing them carefully on the counter so nothing would bruise. Her hands felt cold from the walk, and she rubbed them together for a while, standing by the sink. Her eyes traced the small streaks of dirt along her wrist where the vegetable skins had brushed her as she packed them. She turned on the tap and let warm water run over her hands, watching the dirt swirl away into the drain. Granddad came in from the garden a few minutes later. He always spent time outside in the mornings, checking the grass, trimming the small hedge near the fence, or just standing there looking out over the neighbors' yards. He came in through the back door, closing it quickly to keep the cold out. He wiped his boots on the mat and walked over to where Gran was unpacking the shopping. He reached over and took an apple from the bag, rubbing it on his jumper before taking a bite. Gran watched him for a moment, his jaw moving steadily as he chewed. He asked her how town had been, if she got everything she needed. She told him she had. She started saying how she saw Mrs. Black out in her garden, pulling up weeds, wearing her blue cardigan. Granddad stopped chewing for a second. He stared at Gran with his eyebrows slightly raised. Then he swallowed and shook his head a little. He set the half-eaten apple down on the counter and turned to face her fully. That was when he told her. He told her that Mrs. Black had died, that they had been to her funeral 2 weeks before. Gran just stood there for a moment, staring at him. She felt her body go cold all over, like she had stepped into a bath filled with ice water. She tried to think back, tried to remember clearly what she had seen. She remembered the blue cardigan, the pale flowers on her dress, the way her hair was tied back in a bun. She remembered the smell of dirt and the shape of the weeds in Mrs. Black's hands. She remembered the small smile that crossed Mrs. Black's face when she straightened up from her gardening. Gran felt her knees weaken, and she reached out to grip the edge of the counter. Granddad moved forward quickly to hold her arm, worried she was about to fall. She shook her head a little, trying to clear it, trying to understand what he was saying. He told her again, more quietly this time, that Mrs. Black had died and they had gone to her funeral. Gran closed her eyes and saw again the way Mrs. Black's cardigan had fluttered in the breeze. The image was so strong in her mind that for a moment she felt dizzy. She didn't say anything else about it. She finished unpacking the shopping in silence. She put the vegetables into the wooden crate under the sink, the bread into the bread box near the window, the meat into the small fridge that buzzed quietly in the corner. She wiped down the counter with a cloth, moving slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she cleaned away the faint smudges left by her shopping bags. For the rest of the day, she moved through her chores like she was half awake. She made lunch for Granddad and sat with him at the kitchen table, watching him eat while she picked at her food without really tasting it. She swept the floors, washed the breakfast dishes she hadn't finished before going into town, folded the dry clothes from the line out back. Everything she did felt heavy, like her arms didn't want to lift or move. When Mum came home from school that afternoon, Gran hugged her tightly, holding her for longer than usual. Mum said she remembered feeling confused because Gran didn't normally do that, but she could feel Gran shaking a little as she held her. That night, Gran lay awake for hours. She stared up at the ceiling, her eyes tracing the faint patterns of cracks in the plaster. She could hear Granddad snoring softly beside her, the quiet rhythmic sound of his breathing filling the dark room. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mrs. Black standing there again, brushing dirt from her knees, lifting her hand in greeting, her cardigan moving in the wind. Gran kept telling herself she must have been wrong, that maybe it was someone else wearing a blue cardigan, that maybe she didn't see clearly, that maybe she imagined it. But the memory felt so real, each detail sharp and bright in her mind, like it was still happening in front of her. The next morning, she walked past Mrs. Black's house again on her way to buy milk from the corner shop. The garden was empty. The weeds were growing taller between the flowers, the soil dry and cracked. The curtains were drawn across the windows. The small wooden gate leading to the path was closed. Gran stood there for a while, staring at the garden, waiting to see if any movement would catch her eye. But everything was still. She could hear the distant rumble of a bus engine and the squeak of bicycle wheels as a boy rode past, but the house remained silent. She felt a tightness in her chest, a cold weight pressing down on her ribs. She turned away and continued walking, her steps quick and uneven. When she got back home, she put the milk in the fridge and sat down at the kitchen table. She rested her hands on the worn wood surface and stared at the faint rings left by countless tea mugs over the years. She sat there for a long time, her breathing slow and shallow, her eyes fixed on the table. In that moment, she felt something shift inside her. She realized how thin the walls were between what we think we know and what we don't. How easy it was for your eyes to see something that your mind couldn't understand. She felt small in that kitchen, like the world was bigger and darker than she had ever imagined. From that day on, Gran never walked past Mrs. Black's house without feeling a strange emptiness in her chest. She would look at the garden, overgrown and silent, and remember the way it had looked that morning with Mrs. Black bent over the flower bed. She never spoke about it again. When Mum told me this story years later, she said Gran never wanted to talk about it. She said Gran spent the rest of her life trying to forget that morning. She said sometimes you see something that doesn't fit into your understanding of the world, and your mind just tries to push it away, to bury it so deep inside you that you can keep going.